evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a nice weekend. I had a quiet one, just what I needed. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you on this Monday night from Washington, D.C., right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches. I keep telling you, folks, it works, and if you haven't tried it out, I'm going to give you their 800 number later here in the hour. So get your pen and paper handy. I'm going to give you that number so that you can check out Headaches Stay Gone. As I say, it's a product that works. Well, folks, you know, I shuffled through the papers over the weekend, and today found a few little items I'd like to comment on, and we'll go to the phones later here. The number here, of course, is 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. You know, I had a couple quiz questions on the last program, which unfortunately nobody won, although we had Ben call from Florida, and, you know, Ben was not far off, and I forgot to mention exactly why it was that Ben was very, very close. He seemed to remember, and this goes to show you how good Ben's memory is. Ben was remembering back to 1985 when Liberty Lobby had a lawsuit with William F. Buckley, Jr., and we refer to the fact that in the spotlight, we referred to the fact that Mark Lane, the anti-Zionist Jewish attorney who was representing Liberty Lobby, managed to get Mr. Buckley linguistically tongue-tied. Well, the problem with Ben's memory was that he was associating that reference to William F. Buckley to E. Howard Hunt. And, of course, E. Howard Hunt was mistakenly thought by many of the people who answered the quiz question as to have been the person who ended up destroying Liberty Lobby. So Ben was actually closer in some respects than anybody. Ben has a very good memory because that was written in the spotlight back in 1985, and that's over 20 years ago. He remembered that Mark Lane had managed to tie our good friend William F. Buckley, Jr. up linguistically, which is a major accomplishment. Yes, indeed. Well, so Ben was close, but as they say, no cigar. Close, but no cigar. Well, as I said, I'm going to have some further quizzes as they come about. And also, just to let you know, I will be, all things being equal, I will be a guest tomorrow morning on Mark Dankoff's program, which is broadcast here on RBN. It begins, I believe, at 8 Central. I'm going to be scheduled to be on for 2 hours from 8 to 10 Central Time. That's in the morning, 8 to 10 tomorrow morning, talking about my recent trip to Iran. I talked about that on this program. And we also had David Duke as a guest on the program talking about it, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. Been a lot of interesting developments in the news regarding Iran and that so-called Holocaust denial conference that I attended there. And we'll get a chance to talk about that. So if you have never listened to Mark Dankoff's program and you have some strange desire to listen to me early in the morning as opposed to late at night, you can tune in tomorrow. I'll be looking forward to chatting with Mark. I've never actually spoken to him in person, but we've emailed back and forth quite a few times over the last several years. So this will be a first for me and a first for Mark. Okay, well, we are going to go to a break here momentarily. When we come back, I'm going to run some news notes by you. So all I can tell you, folks, is that I want you to get your pen and paper handy because I'm going to give you that contact number for Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches, which does work. I'm talking from first-hand experience, folks. I'm not reading a script. Stay tuned. This is Michael Collins Piper. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper here, coming to you from Washington, courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone. All right, we have a surprise guest here tonight that I didn't know was going to be aboard with us, but he'll be joining us in a moment. But in the meantime, I want you to get your pen and paper up because here is that number for you to call Headaches Stay Gone and try it out for yourself. 800-327-0727. or check out the website at headachestaygone.com. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just on the break, I received word that we have a call from someone who called in here some time ago, not long ago, and he said if he could, he would bring up a friend of his who knew a gentleman, a very interesting gentleman by the name of Roy Frankhauser. Now, those of you who have read my book, Final Judgment, will recall that there were some very interesting things about Roy Frankhauser being in that book. He's been involved in a lot of quote-unquote right-wing organizations over the years. He was associated with just about every right-wing organization you can think of, plus the Lyndon LaRouche organization. But a lot of that time he was also acting as a, shall we say, informant for Jewish organizations and for the federal government and for God knows who else. So anyway, I guess who do we have out there joining us?
My name is Bob Jones.
Okay, we have Bob Jones. Now, Bob, is your friend with you also, or?
Well, I'm the friend. I'm the person that I interviewed Mr. Frankhauser on 3 separate occasions.
Okay.
Now, first of all, I want to give you all the credit for taking me there. I read the Warren Report in '64, didn't believe it, read Mark Lane, followed the Garrison investigation, was familiar with the New Orleans part of it, I also grew up around Reading, Pennsylvania, and was familiar with Frankhauser and his activities.
Okay.
And I had a friend who, I was a steel worker 25 years, and I had a friend in the steel mill who introduced me to Mr. Frankhauser. My friend was active in the Ku Klux Klan locally. I am not, was never in the Klan. I consider myself a patriot, but at any rate, your book, Final Judgment, was the crown on top of everything. I knew that you had it. Anyway, reading about Frankhauser jogged my memory about the Dan Burroughs deal, and I had read years before that Burroughs' name appeared in Oswald's address book.
Okay, let me interrupt you for a moment there, Bob, just to let the audience know. Dan Burroughs was a member of the American Nazi Party in the early 1960s who later died. He was shot to death in Roy Frankhauser's home. The official story was that Dan Burroughs committed suicide because the New York Times was getting ready to do a story revealing that Dan Burroughs, who was this leader in the American Nazi Party, revealing that he was actually born a Jew. Then, of course, he died in Frankhauser's home and under the best of what we can call mysterious circumstances. So this Burroughs, as you point out, his name was in Lee Harvey Oswald's address book back in 1963 when Oswald was taken into custody and accused of being the assassin of President Kennedy.
That's right. So at the time of the Burroughs supposed suicide in 1965, I was about 14 and came from a pretty politically astute family. My father had given me pretty much of a preliminary education on how things worked, not anywhere close to my understanding today. But at any rate, I remembered the Burroughs suicide in Frankhauser's house on South 4th Street. And Frankhauser has an interesting home. He lives in what has been, in my entire lifetime, a predominantly black neighborhood. And he has a row home in the middle of the street with I would say the size of the sign is somewhere in the area of 8 by 12. And it says Mountain Church of Jesus Christ with a burning cross on it. So, at any rate, my friend, who I'm getting back now to my time that I spent in the steel mill, my friend that introduced me to Roy, I had gone back to college. The mill closed. Of course, the work went offshore, unionized jobs, real good jobs. And I was second generation there in the mill. But at any rate, this fella knew I was writing a paper for a college course, and I was focusing on informants, agent provocateurs, and so on. So I suspected that Mr. Frankhauser was some sort of agent. Then I read your book, and I think in the book or somewhere I read where you said that people should take it upon themselves if they know anything, any of these names that are on the periphery of all this. So I thought, well, this is a great chance. So anyway, I met him at a bar here in Reading during the day. He's kind of a short, heavy-set, kind of a nondescript-looking fella. And he certainly, at least it appeared to me, that he was not the brightest star in the sky. But that could have been an act, but I don't think so. My gut feeling was he's just not that smart. Anyway, I started out with, the first interview was about an hour and a half, and I started out with Lyndon LaRouche and just kind of expressed an interest. I didn't let on anything at that point about the Kennedy assassination, Oswald, Burroughs connection, and so on. But we got to Burroughs, and he danced around. I wasn't really familiar with the Lyndon LaRouche case, but I do remember that I felt like that he was dancing around things with me. When we got to Burroughs, he made the comment, he said, "Oh, yeah, Danny Burroughs." And he said, "Well, I guess everybody knows about that." He said, and I don't care if you put this in your paper, Bob. He said, I'm going to say this for the record. And he emphasized this. He said, Burroughs was one of my best friends, and he was a Jew. You can say that in your paper, that the Nazi leader's best friend was a Jew. So in the course of the next part of the conversation, he proceeded to tell me that I asked him if he had a lot of Jewish friends, and he said that his father and uncle had run liquor for Abe Minker, who was the organized crime boss here in Reading through the heydays of the Lansky Syndicate, 40s, 50s, into the early 60s. And he told me that he was a member of the Jewish Community Center. Now, my friend that was with me, from my buddy from the mill, was sitting next to Frankhauser in a booth. And I looked at him for his reaction, and he reacted something like, "You never told me that, Roy." And he said, "Oh, yeah. He said, it's just part of my undercover game." He said, "I like to see what the enemy's up to." But he told me, in discussing his own personal history, that he was in the Army, stationed in West Berlin, and that, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, but I'll get as close to a quote as I can. He said, he said, "I'll tell you what kind of clout I had. I was with an intel man. We crossed over into East Berlin."
Hey, Bob, we have this break coming up. Please hold. Ladies and gentlemen, you're hearing some very interesting information here tonight about someone who's not very well known, but he's been involved in a lot of interesting things, Roy Frankhauser. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. Bob will be right back with you after a moment or so. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington, right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, courtesy of my sponsor, Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches. Well, you're not going to get a headache listening to what we're hearing tonight. You will get a lot of good, solid, interesting information about someone who was, in my estimation, at least peripherally linked to circumstances surrounding the JFK assassination, not necessarily involved, but certainly connected to people who were involved, and that's a gentleman by the name of Roy Frankhauser. Anyway, we're talking to Bob from Reading, Pennsylvania, who knew Frankhauser, and he's telling us a little bit about what he found out about Frank Hauser from Frank Hauser. Bob, you were talking about Frank Hauser talking about being in the military and going into East Berlin?
Yes. He told me that he joined the Army. I don't remember specifics of age or dates, but he said it was at the height of the Cold War and that the Berlin Wall had just been erected, but that he at this point, I think there was some he was starting to turn into somewhat of a braggart, and I was probably stroking his ego because it seemed like the more I stroked, the more forthcoming he was with information. Plus, I was feeding him large amounts of beer, so he was starting to loosen up around this time, and he said that he was with a military intel man. They crossed into East Berlin, and that he stayed at, and this is a quote, the head rabbi's house in East Berlin. And I kind of rolled my eyes at my buddy, and my buddy reacted like the same way as before, but even more vehemently. He said, "What?" He said, "What the hell were you doing at the head rabbi's house?" And he said, "Well, let me explain. He said, "We were working an operation," and what he proceeded to tell us made no sense. So my friend came out of that first meeting agreeing with me that Roy was into some kind of government work.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he was at. The next time around, he proceeded, we got on the Kennedy thing. I did not mention Final Judgment. And I think at that time you were probably in about the second or third edition.
Okay.
But at any rate, the name was mentioned. It was it wasn't the first edition with the black cover, but I kept it under wraps, never mentioned your book, never mentioned what I knew, and I got him on the subject of Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana, where I guess some of your listeners might not be aware of Alpha 66 and the training program for the anti-Castro Cubans. He said he was there. He said that's where he met Oswald, and Burroughs was there. And Burroughs was a Marine. I remember he told me that. And he said that he was a good Jewish boy from New York. He was his rabbi's, how did he say? He was his rabbi's best student, he said. And I said, well, I thought the story was that he ran into your house, threw that down, and you didn't even know that he was Jewish. And he stammered on that. He choked on that one because he had just let it out of the bag previously that he knew that the kid was his rabbi's prize student.
Okay.
The story at the time was that here locally was that Burroughs ran in with this New York Times article, threw it down on Roy's desk. He had a little office set up in this church, which was really the front room of his house, threw the newspaper down and shot himself. Now, Frank Hauser told me that there were still bloodstains on the ceiling where this guy had splattered himself. He told me that he was with Burroughs and Oswald and Ruth and Michael Payne at some sort of communist gathering where he had gone, that is, Frank Hauser had gone, on behalf of an outfit called the Minutemen.
Okay, now
Minutemen is not the Minutemen that are protecting the border.
Right. Just for the audience's sake, this Michael and Ruth Payne were a couple who were friends of the Oswalds, and it was in Mrs. Payne's house that Mrs. Oswald was staying at the time of the Kennedy assassination. And for years and years, many people have suspected that the Paynes were, in fact, government operatives. And it is known, as I point out in Final Judgment, that Mrs. Payne had connections, although she was not Jewish herself, to Jewish community organizations. So that's who the Paynes are that Roy Frank Hauser claimed to have been associated with in the context of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Well, and of course, it's interesting that you describe it as community organizations because that's exactly what Roy told me he belonged to here in Reading. The Jewish Community Center is a very upscale health club, saunas, swimming pool, at least from what I understand. I've never been there. But I think it's interesting that in both cases that's the link.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I believe, and this is just what I felt coming away from the interview, I believe that that's where his ADL connection was.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Roy has been able to...
we have
Oswald
Bob.
More attention.
Hey, Bob, we have a break coming up here. After this break, we'll have about 25 minutes uninterrupted, so hang on if you would. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington, courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here coming to you from Washington on the Republic Broadcasting Network. We have Bob from Reading, Pennsylvania, talking about the shadowy Roy Frankhauser. Okay, Bob, you were about to make a point there, and then we had the break. Well, we've got about 25 minutes ahead of us here, so you don't have to worry about any breaks for a while.
Okay. Let me get back to the Dan Burroughs connection. I'm not doing any of this. Unfortunately, my notes are long gone, and I'm doing all this from memory. I did try to contact you one time during the late days of the Spotlight.
Okay.
But anyway, apparently the message never got to you or whatever. But
no, I don't think it did. I would have remembered that, I'm pretty sure, yeah.
At any rate, he told me that he went on behalf of, once again, the Minutemen, which in those days was described as a right-wing paramilitary group. Frankhauser and a man named Roger Mellinger were the two head honchos here in Reading. Playboy magazine, I think in August of 1969, did an expose about this group and how they were armed and had some pretty outrageous quotations in it from Frankhauser and Mellinger. Mellinger is long dead. I knew him, but I never really got to pick much information out of him. I wasn't on to all of this at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Frankhauser told me that on behalf of the Minutemen, he went to New York City to infiltrate a Socialist Workers' Party meeting that was being held, and he named the hotel. I can't remember the hotel. And he said that he met Oswald there for the second time, and that he wasn't sure if it was, in his words, if it was the same Oswald. But he said that this one was a homosexual, and he met him, and this is a quote, he met him when he saw him in the bathroom. Now, I left it go at that. I didn't want to pursue anything like that, but that is what he told me. And he said that Ruth Payne and her husband Michael were there. He met them, and that Burroughs knew all of those people.
That's interesting in and of itself, because Ruth Payne and Michael Payne, of course, had a profile of being kind of left-wing types.
Yes.
And that was one of their associations with Oswald, who was posing or was a left-winger or a right-winger. To this day, I don't think we'll ever really know for certain.
Oh, I'm convinced that Oswald was in fact a CIA employee. As a matter of fact, I ran across a memorandum on the Internet yesterday, and I'm not sure, I can't back up to find where I got it. I posted it as wallpaper, but it's a letter from John McCord that Kennedy appointed to head the CIA when he fired Dulles?
No, that was John McCone.
John McCone, that's right. And it was to a man named Rowley, with the head of the Secret Service. And it's dated March 5th, 1964, and it's stamped classified. And it says that Oswald was trained by this agency, the CIA, to perform assignments in the Soviet Union, and that he felt at this time that information should be withheld from the general public.
And let me tell you something about that particular item, Bob. I'm familiar with that, and I'm absolutely convinced that particular item is a fraud. Oh. And I think I know exactly who the person is who perpetrated that fraud. However, Joan Mellon, who has written a very good book about the Garrison investigation through the Freedom of Information Act has, in fact, come up with CIA data which indicates precisely what you just said, that Oswald was indeed working for the CIA when he went into the Soviet Union. So despite that fraudulent information, there is some real solid information that confirms just that.
Right. And I think there's a third possibility, that he'd had no political allegiance whatsoever, that he would have done anything for money, that it was strictly a monetary operation.
Yeah, Oswald was a strange character. A lot of people are convinced that he was that his pose as a left-winger was just that. But, over the years there have been a lot of people with left-wing ideas and ideologies who have still worked for the CIA, so that doesn't rule anything out.
That's right. But his connection to Bannister in New Orleans is pretty much concrete, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. No question about that. Very interesting you bring up the Minutemen, because
Bannister was a Minuteman.
Yeah, the Minuteman organization was founded by a guy named Robert Depew.
That's right.
And what's very, very interesting is that all the evidence indicates that Depew himself was taken over more or less. If he wasn't an FBI think from the beginning, right. he was an FBI informant and operative toward the end of his life. And then Depew himself got in trouble for, as I recall, and I'm trying to find the specific details on it, but Depew himself was later arrested for relations with an underage girl.
Uh-huh.
It's also interesting to note that Depew is also pretty much believed to be the author of a report called DeGuello that has been posted recently on the Internet by Daryl Bradford Smith and Christopher Bollyn and Eric Huffschmidt. So this is basically, that was an FBI propaganda operation, and they used Robert Depew of the Minutemen to put it out there to try to smear people on the right wing. But bringing this full circle, it all comes down to the fact that your friend, quote-unquote, your friend Roy Frankhauser, was in fact associated with Lee Harvey Oswald and Dan Burroughs,
yes,
and Michael and Ruth Payne, who were the people who were housing the Oswald family and kind of keeping an eye on them while they were in Texas prior to the Kennedy assassination.
Right. And they all apparently were taking on this left-wing profile, or in fact they were left-wingers, like you said, and were being used. But the connection was there, and he named those names without any prompting from me. He said, "Have you ever heard the name Mike and Ruth Payne?" And I said, "Well, yeah, Ruth Payne is," and I went through the litany just like you did about that's where Marina lived, and they found the rifle, and she was a Quaker woman, I believe.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, at any rate, he proceeded to deny that he had any connections back to the federal government or back to being any kind of agent provocateur. He has gotten more. Oh, this is the point I wanted to make, is he has gotten through the years more publicity here in the Reading papers, the local papers, than any, just like Oswald in New Orleans, any coup could have dreamed about having. His last headline story, and it was a headline story, and I found something on the Internet about this yesterday when I Googled his name. Apparently, he has just made a deal with the federal government, Frankhauser. He was harassing a white lady who had a mixed-race child, and she worked for one of the government agencies in the federal building downtown, and he was sitting outside the federal building day after day screaming racial insults at this woman. And it was a front-page story here in Reading. Now, the other one that I want to tell you about, the other Frankhauser episode, was in about 1963 or 62 or 3. There was a black man in town named Sonny Boy Black, and he was very outspoken. He was eloquent. He was a popular fella on the nightclub scene. And one day he was vocal about civil rights. He was waiting for a bus downtown, and a station wagon pulled up 5 hooded Klansmen. The rifles came out the window, shotguns, and they peppered him on the street and killed him. Frank Hauser was pulled in at that time. At least that's what the paper said. And the slant at the time was black civil rights leader assassinated by Ku Klux Klan.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, I cannot verify this, but when I asked him about this story, he just flat out refused to talk about it and said, I had nothing in that. That was a bogus deal. The feds pulled me in for nothing. From what I understand, he disappeared during that time frame. This was after his Army career. He disappeared from town for a year or maybe a year and a half. He said that he was hiding from the feds. That's what he told me. Turns out that through the years, I've heard the real story about what happened, and I can't verify this, but this is the story from what I hear on the street. Sonny Boy Black had a relationship with a gentleman that owned a furniture store downtown with his wife, and it was a hit. It was a mob hit, but they dressed him up in Klan outfits to put the blame in that direction.
Okay.
It had absolutely nothing to do with it. But the fact that Frank Hauser refused to talk about it and then said he disappeared because he was hiding from the feds made me suspicious with that whole situation.
Well, you know, it's very interesting.
The store owner is also a member of the Jewish community.
You just put the words right into my mouth. I was about to say that considering the fact that Frank Hauser had a connection with that Jewish rackets boss there in Reading, I thought it was probably a pretty good guess that the furniture store owner was probably connected in some way. So,
absolutely.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Absolutely. I'm trying to jog my memory as far as the Oswald thing, and I've been trying to pull this up. The one thing I do want to say is that there's also talk locally, and there has been for years, that Burroughs actually lives in this area and never did commit suicide in Frank Hauser's house, that the whole thing was staged.
That's very interesting.
They wanted to make him disappear for some reason or another. Now, I asked a friend of mine the other day about this, and he said that he heard that Burroughs went to Israel.
That's interesting, and I wouldn't consider that out of the realm of possibility.
No, I certainly wouldn't either.
Yeah, this is the whole thing. You know, this is that the fact that Dan Burroughs' address was even found in Oswald's notebook was very, very interesting.
Phone number too, unlisted phone number.
And another thing, too, it's been pointed out that there were sightings of Oswald in the Washington, D.C. area, which at that time was the headquarters of the American Nazi Party. So it's very, very likely that Oswald did, in fact, have some contact with Burroughs, and if he was in contact with Burroughs, inevitably he would have been in contact with Roy Frankhauser because they were very close.
Well, Frankhauser made the comment to me, I remember, something about the Marine connection. When Burroughs' name came up, he said he was a Marine too, he said. Or he was a Marine. I'm not sure if he said two, but I remember that he emphasized that a couple of times, that Burroughs had been a Marine. So, of course, Oswald was recruited, we know, out of the Marine Corps.
Out of the Marine Corps, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So you have that crossover. But I thought the highlights were the stay at the rabbi's house, the membership in the Jewish Community Center, which I'm sure is the headquarters of the ADL. I can't imagine where else it would be.
Yeah, a lot of times the ADL doesn't have a formal office in a town or city, but they will have an affiliation there with someone in the local leadership. So that's exactly correct. I mean, it's known that some of, and this is I mentioned in Final Judgment, it's known that at least some of Frankhauser's operations were being financed. It was kind of interesting. He was acting as a federal informant, but his funds were being paid by the Jewish Community Center there in Reading. So that goes to show you, that goes to show you how these organizations will work in tandem with the FBI. So that all ties together very tightly.
And Abe Minker, the rackets boss here in Reading, and this was a real wide-open town even when I first became aware of things in the 60s, things were still wide open as far as prostitution, gambling, all that sort of thing. We had a mayor and a city council, basically, that worked for Abe Minker, and Frank Hauser told me that he knew the general, and the general was Abe Minker. And he said that he made the comment that his dad, I believe his dad and his uncle, he said, both ran rum for Abe Minker.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, Abe Minker was probably the Jack Ruby of Reading.
That's a good analogy, exactly. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Well, the final meeting, Mike, I think you'll find this interesting. I brought a copy of your book.
Okay.
And I told him what the allegations were, basically. And he just about choked. The interview before, he had looked at my buddy and said, boy, this guy really knows the stuff about the Kennedy thing, kind of in a nervous, when I started to get close to things, he had kind of a nervous edge to it. Oh yeah, this guy's really an expert. Where'd you find that out? So then the next meeting I brought your book, and he was, at least he appeared to me to be completely shocked that his name had come up in any way connected with that.
That's interesting, okay.
And then he proceeded to tell me that, well, of course, everybody knows that Oswald was framed, basically, and that it was Frank Hauser's opinion. He said, I often thought if they would have decided to do that here, that they could have made me into an Oswald.
All right, well, we have our final break coming up here, and then we have about 5 minutes when we come back, so we'll try to wrap it up. But I think you've filled in some interesting pieces to the puzzle here, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. This is Michael Collins Piper telling you that you need to try out Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches. Their number is 1-800-327-0727. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper coming back to you here for our final 5 minutes. We have a very interesting guest who made a very interesting connection with a very interesting guy, Roy Frankhauser. Bob, I want to ask you a question. I want to pose a commentary in the form of a question. My impression of Roy Frankhauser, based upon what other people have told me, and certainly from what you've told me here tonight, is that this guy was a genuine, quote-unquote, racist, for want of a better term of putting it, but that he also enjoyed kind of playing footsies with government agencies, with organized crime, with all sorts of intrigue behind the scenes. Would you say that's an accurate assessment?
That's definitely an accurate assessment. I mean, I came away from it with concrete. I mean, by his own admission, he was involved with this Minker who they called the general. He was referring to him as the general, that knowing that I would know who that was.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And Minker was the head of organized crime here. I mean, that's a documented fact, admitted by the mainstream media in later years.
Well, I'll tell you something else.
Racist, Mike, I'm telling you the truth. I'm not quite sure. I have black friends here at Reading that I have through the years went to school with and so on, and I've spoken to them. And during the heyday, there were riots here in the 68, 69 after Dr. King's assassination and so on. And this Mountain Church of Jesus Christ, this little row home that he has that placard where Burroughs shot himself now, you never see any activity. There's never any members. But when I would ask black people, how come that place stayed untouched? Everyone kind of had can't get near that. That's trouble. And it didn't seem to me like they would be the kind of guys that would wilt away from just the ordinary, toothless kind of, redneck of the day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
But yes, one thing that I just remembered while you were on the break was in regard to the LaRouche thing, which I mentioned to you. I had started out with that. I talked to him about his employment history. You know, I went through it like that. I approached it as if I was interested in his biographical information. But the whole time, the center of it was his connections to what you had put me onto in Final Judgment.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I'm about halfway through Judas Goats, and I'm starting to really understand the picture now, Mike.
All right. Hey, well, listen, Bob, I'll tell you what I'd like you to do. If you could tomorrow, give a call to American Free Press in Washington and leave your number there. I'd like to call you and talk to you off the air, and I'd like to put you in touch with somebody else who might be able to fill in some holes in regard to this. So you can get the American Free Press number off the website at American.
Yeah, I'm a subscriber.
Oh, okay, great. Well, yeah, I'll be down there at that office at one point or another tomorrow, but if I'm not there, just leave your number, and I'll know who it is.
I'll do that.
All right, Bob, I appreciate you calling in. I think the listeners, a lot of our listeners are very much interested in the Kennedy assassination, and this is one little corner of that whole big picture that a lot of people have stayed away from, not because they're afraid of it, but because they don't quite understand it.
That's right.
Yeah, and I find it interesting because it all ties in with what I found out in my research, that you find the Lansky crime syndicate, the CIA, and even so-called racist organizations and individuals.
How about Joseph Miltier?
Including Joseph Miltier, exactly. Bob, I appreciate you calling in tonight, and thanks to your friend who hooked us up together here tonight.
Hey, Mike, you're the greatest.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Bob. I'll be looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Ladies and gentlemen, very interesting and surprising show. This goes to show you we have a lot of interesting listeners out there and callers who know a lot of interesting people. I learned a little bit tonight, and I hope you did too. Stay tuned for more good programming, and we'll see you here tomorrow night. But if you get up early, you'll hear me on Mark Dankoff. I'll have to get up early too, folks. All right, have a good evening. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. It is Tuesday, March 6th. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you from a very cold, very, very cold Washington, D.C. Well, you know, folks, there is some good news out of Washington today. Very seldom there's any good news to report, but I am so pleased as punch, as the late Hubert Humphrey would say. I am pleased as punch that I, Louis Scooter Libby, the former chief of staff to Vice President Dick Cheney, has been convicted for lying to the FBI. Folks, if there is, I never wish prison on anybody, folks. I wish this was a nice world where people didn't go out and commit crimes against other people that required them. It requires them to be sent to prison. But if there's anybody who does deserve to be sent to prison, it's Scooter Libby. Because I've been convinced for a long, long time, folks, that he was he certainly was one of the foremost neoconservatives inside the Bush administration. But I'm absolutely convinced that he is the head of the octopus and has been for a long, long time, buried right there inside the vice president's office, largely outside a lot of media and public scrutiny, and now he has been convicted. Frankly, folks, it was a very complicated case, and as I told someone today, if my life depended on it, I don't think I could even give you the details of that case. I think what we have here today, folks, although this jury obviously labored for a long, long time to make sure they had a verdict that they could believe in themselves, I think in the end, ultimately, if truth be told, this jury convicted Louis Libby for precisely who he was and for what he really did, for his role in getting the United States into this hellish war in Iraq that continues, a war that has now claimed the lives of over 3,100 Americans, approaching 3,200 Americans, and has led to the butchering and maiming of 10 or 20,000 others. I lose track of these figures, folks, because, after one person has been killed or wounded in a war that shouldn't be fought, the figures really don't matter. This horrible man, Louis Libby, I hear all these horror stories about prison. I hear about these Aryan gangs and black Muslim gangs that populate our prisons. Well, folks, I'm going to be candid here, and I hope I don't shock anybody. But I do hope Louis Libby gets sent to a federal prison where he belongs. And I hope that there he receives his just and deserved punishment. The man is a mass murderer. He is a ruthless man whose agenda was driven by his religious fanaticism. Louis Libby deserves the utmost punishment, ladies and gentlemen. This is Michael Collins Piper. We'll be back in a moment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. The second time today, that is. I had the great pleasure, the great honor, really, of being a guest for 2 hours this morning on the broadcast of Mark Dankoff, Mark Dankoff's America. That is the first time I ever actually spoke to Mark, and it was a pleasure indeed. His verbal communication skills are right up there on par with his very considerable literary skills, which I've admired from afar, that is, over the Internet for the past several years since Mark first popped up on my radar, and I was just very, very impressed with his capacities as a radio host. And I want to thank Mark for having me on the show, and I also want to thank the Republic Broadcasting Network and John Sanders Statmiller for showing their great wisdom in bringing on a host like Mark Dankoff. He's a great guy, and if you have never listened to his program, folks, and you have the time to do it, I urge you to do so. Good man, very, very good, decent man, very intelligent man. Well, I am here on this network, of course, courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches, and later in the hour I'm going to give you the 800 number for Headaches Stay Gone because, as I always am pleased to tell you, it works. You know, we were talking about doing a pre-recorded announcement for Headaches Stay Gone, but I didn't really want to do that because I want to tell you from myself firsthand, unrehearsed, just exactly how good it is. I've told you time and again that it's worked for me, and I'm not particularly plagued by headaches. But I have known a couple people who are plagued by headaches on a regular basis, and they are finding that Headaches Stay Gone does indeed work. So later on, I'm going to give you their 800 number because I want you to call and get a sample for yourself. And when you find that it does work, as I think it will for you, then you pay the bill. Well, folks, if I sounded a little angry when I started the program here this evening, talking about Louis Libby, I was angry. Not about the fact that Louis Libby was convicted. No, I'm celebrating that, folks, and as I say, I hope he gets the full punishment that he deserves. As I say, I keep hearing about all these black Muslim gangs in the prisons and the white Aryan gangs. Well, my God, folks, it sounds to me as though the fact that Louis Libby will soon be among them might give the black Muslim gangs and the white Aryan gangs a mutual cause to rally around. I'd like to see them get together for once instead of fighting and form a lynch mob and take out Louis Libby right when he's right within their hands because this man is a murderer. He's as much of a murderer as President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney and Richard Pearl and all of these hellish neoconservatives who are responsible for this war. Which brings me to why I am so angry, folks. Just before I sat down to prepare for this radio broadcast, I received an email from my friend John DeNugent, who's been on this program, and he included a photo of a young couple, Ty Ziegel and Renee Klein. Ty was a Marine officer. Renee was his fiancée. There's a pre-Bush picture of Ty and Renee, and then a picture of their wedding. Ty's back from Iraq. His face absolutely destroyed. Handsome young man, his face absolutely destroyed, but this young woman is marrying this man because she loves him. But I know that he has many, many years ahead of corrective surgery, and his life is going to be pretty rough in the years that follow. And this is a young Marine that went over there to Iraq, and he didn't pay, as they call it, the supreme sacrifice, but he lost his face, folks. He looks like a monster. I don't think it's incorrect to say that. It's a pathetic picture. We've all seen pictures of people who suffered this way. I had a relative who was burned by acid, and she looked like a monster. That was before the days of corrective surgery. Very fine lady. She was a very fine nurse. And seeing the photo of this young man who survived, but who now obviously faces a long period of time and a lot of psychological suffering and pain, for fighting in a war, that it's just, Louis Libby deserves the worst, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll be honest with you, when I heard that Vice President Dick Cheney was hospitalized for a blood clot, I had some strange thoughts about the vice president, too. I was kind of hoping they couldn't catch that blood clot. But, that would be a too quick and easy end for that man. He should be imprisoned. He should be imprisoned, ladies and gentlemen. He is one of the worst offenders there. Vice President Dick Cheney is. But, the only thing that scares me about Dick Cheney being called home by God before his term would come to an end, and what it scares me, folks? I can just very easily see George W. Bush appointing that independent Democrat from Connecticut, Joe Lieberman, as vice president. And I guarantee you, folks, if George W. Bush was stupid enough to appoint Joe Lieberman as his vice president, the president himself, Mr. Bush, who stole the office, of course, he would prove exactly how stupid he is, because I guarantee you that if Joe Lieberman became vice president, there would be an inordinate number of banana peels lying around in the hallways of the White House and in public places where President Bush was in appearance. No doubt about it in my mind, the Zionists could not resist the opportunity to put one of their own in the White House. And George W. Bush would find himself no longer president, but shoveling coal in the fiery pits of hell. Well, he's going to do that eventually. There's no question about that in my mind. George Bush is going to go to hell, and he's going to shovel coal right alongside with all of the other people who helped orchestrate this war, and for that matter, other wars. But if he were stupid enough to make Joe Lieberman as vice president, I have a sneaking suspicion that Mr. Bush would suddenly find his own presidency. He would find the plug on his presidency pulled real fast with no hesitation. Well, folks, talking about this sad subject, here is reading in the Washington Post. There are at least 300 known veterans of the Iraq War and of Afghanistan. Although, of course, these wars have been only going on since 2001. There are at least 300 of these veterans known to be homeless. Now, if that's the numbers that we know that are homeless, God knows how many more there are homeless. And my question to you is, why is there a single veteran, really a veteran of any war, a veteran of any military service in the United States, why is there one single person homeless? We ship billions of dollars over to Iraq on a daily basis. The state of Israel gets $10, $12, $15 billion a year and more, really, in welfare money from the American taxpayers. Billions upon billions of dollars, and we can't provide homes for even veterans. Something stinks in this country, ladies and gentlemen. Something stinks. I just don't get it, folks. There's just something wrong, and we really do need to do something about it. As I say, I told Mark Dankoff today, I've referred to it on this show. I really believe our only hope at this time is for the military to stand in rebellion, and I pray that they do. I pray that they do, because these are the people who fight the wars. These are the people who suffer in the wars. Their families suffer. And, we, the taxpayers, pay for it. There are a lot of people out there who revel in all this stuff. They really revel in the sight of the American military going in and creating havoc in Iraq. But, that havoc they're creating is going to come back in our faces. It's called blowback, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very frightening. Well, the Israelis are bitching and moaning and complaining that Iran is training Hamas. Well, all well and good. At this point, I've reached a point I'm not even going to pretend that I don't believe that the fellows in Hamas might not have the right idea in striking back at Israel, because, Israel has created its own mess by its treatment of the Palestinians, because they can't treat people decently. So every time there's payback, it's an ugly payback, and it's very sad. But the big joke about the fact that Israel is now claiming that Iran is training Hamas, and that, of course, is the fact that it was Israel, the government of Israel, that funded the creation of Hamas in the first place. They funded Hamas as a creation designed to undercut the secular nationalist aspirations of Yasser Arafat. They funded Islamic religious fundamentalists as a counterpoint to Yasser Arafat. And now Hamas has effectively taken command of the Palestinian movement. Again, this is something that Israel created on its own, folks. So they should not be surprised that they are suffering as a direct consequence, just as Americans should not be surprised that we, too, are suffering as a direct consequence of the insane policies of our government. Or I should say a government that purports to represent us. All right, we'll go to the phones in a little while here, folks, so you're free to call in here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, courtesy of Headache Stay Gone. Now, I know you have your pen and paper handy. I'm going to give you the 800 number for Headache Stay Gone. It's 800-327-0727. And, of course, the website on the Internet for all the very interesting information about Headache Stay Gone is at headachestaygone.com. But here's the number, 1-800-327-0727. Headache Stay Gone. Let me tell you what's in it. It's an herbal blend with rosemary, peppermint, ginger mint, blue vervain, slippery elm, nettles, meadowsweet, basil, hops, and white willow bark. And I'm here to tell you, folks, none of that is going to kill you. None of that is going to give you these awful side effects that so many of these big drug company products for headaches and colds and all sorts of things give you. You look at some of these, some of the things. I always love the commercial, folks, where they tell you that some product is going to save you from your allergies, but you know what? The side effects of that allergy medicine might be a head cold. Figure that one out, folks. Save yourself from allergies by giving yourself a cold. Doesn't make sense to me. Well, saw an interesting picture. They were celebrating Purim in Israel. The Washington Times, in a cut line of this celebration in Israel, says it marks the time when Jews living in Persia were saved from genocide, as told in the book of Esther. What they forgot to mention was that there were 75,000 Persians genocided. Purim is a celebration of the slaughter of 75,000 people, folks. My God. What a religious holiday. Talking about religion, I was watching a program here the other night, Cold Case. It's a crime drama. One of the few television shows I actually watch. It's on Sunday nights. I believe it's on CBS. And you know, while the killer wasn't an evil, conspiring, nasty nun. The show featured evil, conspiring, and nasty nuns. I just can't imagine. You would never see an evil, conspiring, nasty rabbi on mainstream television. But evil, conspiring, nasty nuns are fair game, apparently. Just more and more of this warped propaganda that comes across, not just in the news, but in what passes for entertainment. It's just remarkable, folks. Hillary Clinton is such a performer, folks. She spoke at this I don't know what you call it, the commemoration of the Selma Civil Rights March, and it's kind of funny because in her speech there, Hillary bragged about the fact that as a young girl in 1962, she had gone to a speech by Martin Luther King at some church somewhere or another. But it's kind of funny because, if you remember anything about Hillary, she's trying to make it sound like she was a big supporter of Martin Luther King when she was a little church-going girl in 1962. But, the funny thing is, 2 years after that, in 1964, little Hillary was campaigning heartily for Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential nominee, who actually voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, I'm not passing judgment on either Hillary or Barry Goldwater or the Civil Rights Act, but again, I'm just pointing out kind of what appears to me to be a little bit of hypocrisy on Hillary's part, implying that she was somehow a supporter of Martin Luther King's principles, and certainly one of his principles in 1964 was support for the Civil Rights Act. But, Hillary Clinton is very much a performer. But then again, all these rotten politicians are performers. Watching the news reports about the apologies and anger at the Walter Reed hearings. Folks, they're making it sound, they're playing the blame game with the situation in our military hospitals and the Army hospitals. Well, anybody who knows anything about the VA hospitals and the military hospitals knows that this scandal has been happening for a long, long time, and now everyone is crying boo-hoo-hoo. Send them over and get them butchered, and then butcher them when they come home. That's the policy, folks. All right, we're going to the calls after this break. God bless our military, folks. God bless our military. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Michael Collins Piper, coming to you from Washington, courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone. If you have headaches, folks, this natural cure for headaches is one that you want to try out. Don't take all these terrible, terrible body-destroying products that you buy in the drugstore that the doctors subscribe to you. Check out Headaches Stay Gone. You will be glad you did. You can handle the truth, to borrow a phrase. Headaches Stay Gone can be found on the internet at headachesstaygone.com. Okay, well, let's go to the callers. First caller this evening here is David from Massachusetts. David, come on up.
Well, hello, Michael.
Hey, Dave. How you doing tonight?
Good. I'm sure it's as cold in Washington, District of Columbia, as it is up here in New England.
Oh, I can imagine. Good Lord.
Because you people have very damp and cold, windy weather down there. Now, concerning this talk about, there's several points I want to make, not extending too much into one point, but getting several points across. Number one, you talked about these, you use a good word, get them butchered over in Iraq and bring them here and get them butchered. I would refer to these people in the military-industrial alliance that are making big money on this war. They want it to continue forever because they have their foot in both parties, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. And as many people get butchered, I'm sure that they're snickering up their sleeve because they're making big money on these profits. And I would relate this indirectly to that book written in the 1930s by that retired Marine Corps general who wrote that book called War's a Racket.
Smedley Butler, right.
Yeah, Butler. I forgot his name momentarily. Smedley Butler. It all ties in with a book like his, and his book is a good book to read in relation to what's going on today. And
yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I mentioned Smedley Butler when I appeared on Mark Dankoff's program here on RBN today. Yeah, he was quite a fellow, quite an interesting guy, very principled American who fought wars but opposed them.
You're correct. I didn't hear your program. I wasn't able, but I'm glad you brought that point out. And here's another point to bring out. We got this utterly useless, worthless contrivance called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. It has absorbed billions and countless billions of dollars of our taxpayers' money, and to a lesser extent European countries, their taxpayers' money, since 1949. It has done nothing to contribute to the security of our country. I want to bring out several points about that. Number one, in 1949, when you had men of the intelligence of like Senator Robert Taft of Ohio, Glenn Taylor of Idaho, he was the vice presidential candidate, I think, for Henry Walker.
Yeah, but yes, indeed he was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, the other names voting against it, I forgot their names, and I'm very sorry I haven't remembered their names, but I'm going to have to get to some book and look the whole thing up and call you at a future date and mention all of these gentlemen. The NATO pact, unfortunately, was approved by a pretty good-sized vote, something like 83-13, I'm sorry to tell you. But when you have men of the ability of Taft and Taylor who voted against the NATO pact, they realized then that Joe Stalin had about as much desire to invade Western Europe as you have or I have right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He was so busy rebuilding Russia from the vast damage of World War II that Stalin and the Soviet government had neither the inclination or the money or the food or the available resources to do it if they wanted, because there was just so much to do to rebuild the vast damage in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And I believe that Truman pushed through NATO with the Marshall's support and other people's support in Congress because Truman didn't know how to end unemployment, and it was like a make-work project, put people to work.
Another boondoggle, essentially. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could call it a boondoggle. It falls right into that category. And like I said, I don't believe Stalin had any intention to invade Europe. He had too much to do to rebuild Russia from all the vast damage of World War II. And all these troops in NATO we have today that are wasting our taxpayers' money by being employed in a useless government positions, they could be on the border of Mexico keeping out all these illegal immigrants for the last 25 years.
You know, see, that's the whole thing, Dave. You know, I've always been a firm supporter of the military. I've always believed that we should have an Army and a Navy and an Air Force second to none, that we should be guarding our northern border and our southern border and our beaches. You know,
absolutely.
That's what the military is supposed to be for. The military was never envisioned by our founding fathers to be policing the world as though the United States were an empire. And, you know, it's funny, this neoconservatives are now promoting the idea that, well, yes, the United States was an empire from the very beginning, so let's just admit that we are and continue to play the role. But, you know, of course, the United States found itself engaged in foreign lands and in foreign ventures. I mean, we had to fight the Barbary pirates and so forth, you know, but that didn't make us an imperial country.
Well, the United States at the time fought that action because U.S. ships had been attacked in the high seas.
Exactly.
But they had no intention back in 1805 and 1810 of virtually dominating the world. And
yeah, what was it John Quincy Adams, your man from Massachusetts, said, we don't go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, something like that?
Well, he could have said something of that sort, yes.
Yeah.
And again, on this issue of the southern border of Mexico, I've said this before on your program and a couple of other talk shows, and it can't be said enough. The whole issue of illegal immigration, which is mainly Hispanic people, revolves around nothing more than low wages. most of the people being hired, the illegal immigrants, most of them are being hired by small and medium business people, whereas big business is busy promoting things like NAFTA and that rotten highway that they want to put through Texas, dividing the state by 1/3. And the whole illegal immigration issue, as I said, revolves around low wages, where our Congress and our presidents have invited all of these illegal immigrants in from Mexico because they don't want to pay decent wages. And if the Democrats had kept up with Roosevelt's New Deal on the economic aspects, which is called a New Deal, today, I'll admit and you'll admit, there might be a $12 an hour minimum wage. It would apply to farm labor, and the cost of food would be higher, admittedly, but it'd be better than having all of the problems attendant with illegal immigration.
And problems that are only going to get worse, and problems that are going to break the bank here in the United States trying to fix the problems in the first place.
And I want to say another thing about this illegal immigration in regards to Mexico. I believe that the Mexican government is deliberately understating its amount of money that it gets from Pemex, which is that term meaning Petroleum Mexico.
Yeah, that's their national oil monopoly.
In which they sell natural gas and petroleum to other nations. I believe they're understating. I thought I read, now this is right off the top of my memory, I might be wrong, but I thought I read that they had foreign sales or total sales, whatever that means, of $330 billion, meaning natural gas and petroleum. I personally believe it's understated because I'm saying this, that if that money were used properly, they wouldn't have all these people coming to this country because they'd have jobs for them in their own country, number one. Number two, they could have national health care instead of our stupid government taking in all these illegal immigrants and paying national health care for them. And the ruling clique in Mexico, I believe all these big politicians are stealing vast sums of money from Pemex.
Yeah, all the presidents of Mexico in the past have retired as billionaires. Now, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells you that they're stealing money to the extent of Holy Hail Columbia. That's what it tells you.
And yet, it's funny, these guys are still highly honored by the United States. I mean, one of the former presidents of Mexico, his brother was implicated in international drug trafficking, and everybody knew that he was actually just working on behalf of his brother, the president, and yet these guys aren't prosecuted. We're busy sending marijuana smokers to jail.
Now, wasn't that person that you're referring to de Madrid?
Frankly, I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the past 3 or 4 presidents. I'm not sure, Dave.
But I know that back in the early 1990s, around the time that Gulf War I was going on, or just about getting over, around that period, the early 1990s, it may have been de Madrid who was charged with depositing somewhere between $350 million and even more money into a bank in Geneva, Switzerland. He was brought to court, I believe, in Mexico, and the conditions of their court system are not good. I don't think they ever convicted him of anything.
No. They don't convict they don't convict the big boys. They only go after the little guys.
What we call the street people.
Yes.
They're the ones who can go to jail, but these big people, they're like the untouchables. And the government of Mexico, I said this before, and it's got to be repeated again and again and again. Starting in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, the government that we call the PRI, the Revolutionary Institutional Party of Mexico, urged the poverty-stricken people of Mexico to have big families in which they would become a major force in the government of Mexico, and if possible, to go to the United States, and that they could eventually become a big, big force in the United States, and we're living to see that happen right before our eyes. I'm not an advocate for war, but maybe we should declare war against Mexico. That kind of war seems more logical than the wars we're fighting over in the Middle East. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If I had a choice between who I'd rather trust, I'd trust that guy over in Russia, Putin.
Mm-hmm.
I'd trust him any day before I'd ever trust people like Calderon or Vicente Fox.
I never thought of it before, Dave, but I think you're probably right.
Well, it's a good thing that we have got this Republic Broadcasting network where these things can be said because it's you people are conducting what it probably, not probably they are. I don't think there's any probably. The best talk shows in this country.
Well, you're sure not getting it on ABC or CBS or any of these other outfits.
No, you won't. And you'll have these highly paid people who are either brain-damaged alcoholics or brain-damaged drug-addicted people. They'll dominate the program, and they dominate about 98% of it. And once in a while, they'll let somebody talk. And one time out of 1,000, somebody will disagree with them.
Well, look at Rush Limbaugh. He used to hang up on people that mentioned the Federal Reserve. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, even the so-called alternatives that they present the American people with are just absolute garbage.
A person like Rush Limbaugh, unfortunately, it's too bad this has to be said, he's an upper-income person, probably grosses millions of dollars a year, and he is nothing but a scourge on the political landscape because there's nothing on his program that is almost ever talked about that is worth listening to.
Yeah, he's a bad guy, and unfortunately, for many, many years, he seemed to capture the enthusiasm of a lot of people, but he was capturing their enthusiasm as he was leading them right over the cliff. So maybe people are finally catching up to him in the other sense and finally realizing what he's all about.
Well, I'll tell you what. I would say that getting back to this thing, that when you look at Calderon and you look at Vicente Fox, they're involved with this Governor Perry of Texas. Isn't he still governor?
Yeah, I think and I think he may have. Yeah, no, that's right. He just got reelected. Yeah,
I think. Yeah. And they're involved and up to their necks in that rotten highway that they want to put through this country, ruining all kinds of good quality land. And people all over the country, just like in Texas, should be concerned about this because it's a threat to this country. That highway is a threat to this nation, and I believe that there should be there should be some kind of an international law that foreign investors cannot own highways in any country in the world. Not only should these foreign people be forbidden to own highways in America, but American investors shouldn't be able to own highways in other countries. That's
interesting, Dave, because we hear so much about economic imperialism and so forth. If we really want to put an end to it, that would be the ideal way to do it. A lot of people would scream like stuck pigs, kind of like Louis Libby, but that would be one way. That would be equitable because then American investors couldn't be interfering in the affairs of other nations, and likewise other nations couldn't be interfering in our affairs, and everybody could protect their own borders. And you see, that's the funny thing about it. Everybody tries to make nationalism a bad thing. Nationalism is a good thing if in that nationalism you protect your own national sovereignty, you protect your own borders, the integrity of your own culture, and the integrity of your own people's needs. But people say nationalism is bad, and they say it causes wars. No, it's internationalism that is bad and which causes wars. I mean, I think we've seen that very, very clearly here just in the last several years alone, and anybody who doubts it has their head in a hole in the ground.
Now, I would say that you're right, and I would not only are you correct, what you said, I would extend your remarks as far back as 100 years ago. All of this internationalism has dragged this country into every international conflagration in the world, starting back in World War I, which did a lot of moral damage to this country and dragged this country into a war that we didn't have to get involved in.
That's right, really, and it's amazing when you consider it now. It really does go back to the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. We're talking over 100 years now. And these past 100 years, you hear some of these internationalists and these New World Order types, they say it was the American century. Well, I'll tell you what, this American century that just passed is indeed passing, and there's going to be a mighty price to be paid for that American century. There was no glory in it whatsoever.
The so-called American century, and here's another thing you heard about that big phony thing. Years ago, somebody in the Spotlight had, when the old Spotlight existed, they had a very good article criticizing that very phony term. Remember about this, the World War II, the greatest generation? The
greatest generation. Mm-hmm.
All it was just a lot of propaganda.
Yeah, Dave, I couldn't put it better myself. Listen, Dave, thanks for your call. We're getting ready to wrap up this hour. We're going to try to squeeze in our last two callers in the few minutes remaining. Stay tuned. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches. And, folks, I'm here to tell you, it works. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. We're wrapping it up here. We have another caller here. Try to squeeze him in. It's Fred from Pennsylvania. Fred, are you there?
Hi, Michael.
How you doing tonight?
I just want to make an observation. It looks as though the administration is going to own all the war and security issues. I don't think the Democrats are going to get any traction. I think that you have a situation where Bush has the executive branch. He has a Supreme Court. He has a very large number of federal judges. The business community, that is the dominant people in the business community,
who are very much part of making a profit off Homeland Security ideals. Yeah.
And the five media companies, the mass media model, not the internet. And on the other side, you may have the people, and you have a Democratic Congress. But he has gotten very good at exercising these levers of power, and I don't know any major issue that we're winning on.
Well, you know, it's funny you say this because I was reading the paper here earlier tonight, and I was watching reading of how there are various Democrats who I think are good people who are making legitimate efforts to try to do something about the war, but then at every given moment they seem to be stopped by their own leadership, or there's some new machination that really makes it impossible for them to do anything. So I think you're absolutely right, Fred. Bush has got it all locked up in terms of the reality of the situation, in terms of, as you say, he has his hands on the levers that really count.
Yeah, and Homeland Security, in a way, you said something that was exactly right. Homeland Security is like an extra club that he has developed, and everyone then has to praise and be loyal to this club of Homeland Security. So it's like another weapon.
Yeah, I just saw there's a magazine called Homeland Security, which is kind of the new in-house club publication for all these corporate entities that are profiting off quote-unquote Homeland Security. It's amazing how many major corporations, well-known names and not-so-well-known names, are all making a profit.
And there's a National Counterterrorism magazine out there, too.
Oh, well, thank God. We got to fight the terrorists, Actually, I think we do need to fight the terrorists, and the biggest one lives about 15 blocks from me at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest.
God bless you.
All right, Fred, thanks for your call. Apologies to those we couldn't get up, but we'll be here tomorrow night right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. If you got a headache from listening to this program, that's not my intention, but if you did get a headache, you know the answer. It's called Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you here tomorrow night. Let's have some good... All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you live from a very cold and snowy Washington, D.C. on this Wednesday, March 7th. Well, in about 6 weeks, I guess, April 15th, we'll all have to file our income tax returns. Although I hear many of you out there shouting, not me. Unfortunately, I will be. I had my taxes done today, folks, and it hurt. It hurt bad. Because it hurts bad anytime you have to pay any taxes. And I'm not a big big advocate of the IRS or even paying taxes, but sometimes it's easier just to do it. But I'll tell you what was nice about this particular trip to the accountant today. Purely out of the blue, I had a very interesting discussion with one of the ladies there who is an accountant who, it turns out, is a devotee of alternative health, natural cures, homeopathic remedies. And, she told me that, her brother used to think she was kind of a witch doctor. But she said more and more now her brother is beginning to recognize the fact that there really is something to alternative health. So, it's funny. In the damnedest places, you run into people who have similar concerns and similar ideas. And, we didn't go beyond that subject. But, like I say, you never can tell when you're going to turn around and find somebody else here in this big, bad world who shares your point of view. Well, of course, you've heard my point of view about natural cures, natural remedies. I talk about it all the time on the show because I've learned about natural cures and natural remedies through my work for the Spotlight and through American Free Press. And over the years, people said, American Free Press is really good on political issues, but then they get around to that quackery. Well, I'm here just to remind you folks, it's not quackery, and you need to try out alternative remedies, natural cures. And one of the good ones is right in my hand, and of course it just happens to be the sponsor of my show. It's called Headaches Stay Gone. It's the all-natural cure for headaches. Very, very good, folks. A blend of various herbs, none of these chemicals that you get in these killer over-the-counter products that you get in the stores. Headaches Stay Gone can be found on the internet at headachesstaygone.com, or you can call them at 1-800-327-0727. 1-800-327-0727. Now, if they could only come up with a product called IRS Stay Gone. But, folks, the only way we're going to ever have a product like that, or whether we're ever going to have a situation like that, is when we turn our entire government around. We need a George Bush stay gone and a Dick Cheney stay gone, and we can hope that Louis Libby, who just got convicted on several felony counts, will be gone forever. But we do need some big change in this country, folks, and, this is the question. How are we going to go about getting that change we need? I have my own ideas, but you know what? I'm really not physically able to raise an army to march on Washington, D.C. Hopefully there is somebody out there who can do it. I'm not the one to do it, but you know what? I'll tell you what, if somebody did raise a real army, I'd cheer them on, although I just don't think I'd have the energy to join it. All right, folks, when we come back, a little bit more commentary, and then eventually we're going to go to the phones, probably around the end of this half hour. So stay tuned. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you headache-free as a consequence of Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches, right here on RBN Live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Michael Collins Piper. I hope this cold weather here kills some of the germs up here on Capitol Hill, but I don't want to start naming the germs because I might accidentally mention one of your favorite members of Congress, assuming you have any. Sad news from Israel. Sad news from Israel, ladies and gentlemen. The old traditional ideals of the kibbutz have collapsed in Israel. According to the Washington Times, the image of the bronzed and brawny kibbutz field worker was once the trademark of a young Israel, but the iconic agricultural communities are becoming a thing of the past. Israel is shifting to capitalism from socialism, they say, and the kibbutzes are scrapping their egalitarian salary schemes and allowing members to live each according to their own earning power. Boy, oh boy, that's going to come as sad news to the one and only Christopher Bollyn, self-styled former star reporter for the American Free Press. You know, Bollyn doesn't mention this on his page at Darrell Bradford Smith and Queen Esther Huffschmidt's website, but, you know, Bollyn spent a couple summers living on a kibbutz in Israel, working as a lifeguard, I believe the official cover story is. And then, you know, he later married an Israeli woman. That's something that Bollyn doesn't mention in his rather extraordinary and sometimes fanciful biography on that website. So if you want to know about Israeli kibbutzes, that Israeli ideal, check with self-styled former star reporter Christopher Bollyn. And you might ask him about why he worked on a kibbutz for 2 years, and why he married an Israeli woman who he later claims was an Israeli spy. Spying on him? Who knows? Very enigmatic character, that Mr. Bollyn. Likewise with his wife, supermodel Helya Caskell. Supermodels, not exactly anti-establishment. And we've heard about models and presidential models from Kathy O'Brien. Well, these conservatives, they've got their superstars. You know, the big gang of conservative activists met here in Washington, some 6,000 people, all told, and a bunch of politicians pranced back and forth in front of them, and they took a straw poll among the conservatives. And Mitt Romney, the former Massachusetts governor, who seems to be a liberal one day and a conservative the next, depending on what issue happens to be in the forefront, he won. He was first choice for the GOP nomination with 21%. Then former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani with 17%, and then Sam Brownback of Kansas was third with 15%. What a gang! Brownback is the guy who once proposed setting up tribunals to investigate college professors and students who were accused or suspected of harboring anti-Israel or anti-Semitic tendencies. And, of course, when his mad point of view, Mr. Brownback's mad point of view, if you're a critic of Israel, you're anti-Semitic. Well, of course, nothing could be further from the truth, but in his twisted mindset, Mr. Brownback's mindset, that's the case. Giuliani, of course, is coming on strong, despite his reputation of being a bit of a liberal, because, you know, all these conservatives, these grassroots conservatives, think that he saved the world on September 11th. What a racketeer this guy Giuliani is. And then, of course, Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, interestingly enough, is the guy that they're questioning whether or not, because he's a Mormon, he's fit for the White House. Well, I don't have any opinions on that one way or the other, but I find it very interesting that his religion can be openly and freely discussed. Another big star at this Conservative Political Action Conference, loosely known as CPAC, is the reprehensible Newt Gingrich. And you know what I don't like about Newt Gingrich, ladies and gentlemen? He's a really ugly guy. He's a really I've stood beside him several times in several business establishments here on Capitol Hill, and he's just a really ugly looking person. Now, you know, I know he can't help that, but you know, aside from all that, what's even uglier about Newt Gingrich is that he is just a real operator. He is someone, we've talked about him here on this show. You know, his wife was on the Israeli pad while he was a member of Congress, and this is a guy who's been fooling the conservatives, the grassroots conservatives, for a long, long time, but yet they love him. They love him, and that goes a lot to tell you about the demise of the traditional conservative movement here in the United States. I used to go to these CPAC meetings here in Washington back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and you know, I'll tell you what really represents where CPAC has gone is that their big banquet speaker a few years ago at CPAC was none other than Benjamin Netanyahu, the former hardline Zionist, right-wing Likudnik Prime Minister of Israel, one of the most dangerous men, I think, on the face of the planet. Yeah, these conservatives, I don't have any time for them, and you know, they can have their little parlays and their parties here in Washington and go home and thinking they're remaking the country. But folks, all they are doing, they are playing the role of patsies for the real power brokers here in Washington. You know, I don't know where Ron Paul showed up on that poll of the conservatives. I'd like to find out. I'm going to have to do some checking on that. I would hope to think that there's some sane conservatives who attended that CPAC who voted for Ron Paul. Because, you know, Ron Paul is a good man, Congressman Ron Paul from Texas. No question about that. I've never heard a bad thing about him from anybody, personally, politically. You know, but it just goes to show you that even these conservatives who will go over the cliff for a long shot are so divorced from real traditional American constitutionalism, American, you know, Jeffersonian ideals, the old-fashioned Americanism represented in George Washington's farewell address to the American people, the Declaration of Independence. They are so far divorced from it that they can abandon someone like Ron Paul and support someone so egregiously ugly in all aspects. His ugliness comes from within, ladies and gentlemen. That's why he's such an ugly person physically, Newt Gingrich. And, you know, I seldom make judgments about people based on their looks, because some of the ugliest people in the world are some of the sweetest, kindest, most intelligent, most thoughtful people in the world. But Newt Gingrich is not among them. He's just a really ugly man in all respects, and yet he's a man who gets seriously touted for the presidency, who is taken seriously for the presidency by people who say they value traditional American principles. God, if these are the people who value traditional American principles, we don't need any more conservative grassroots activists in this country. If that's the kind of garbage we're getting at CPAC, as they call it here. Another gathering of evil folks is going to be taking place. These people are very, very, very evil, and that is the group known as AIPAC. They're going to be having a big conference here in Washington very shortly. I forget the exact date, but you're going to see all the politicians tripping over themselves, just saying how wonderful Israel is, and Israel can have whatever it wants. And it's kind of funny, you know. I was thinking, you know, during World War II, my father commanded one of these fire crews that went through the jungle spraying fire for various and sundry purposes, one of which I suppose resulted in the deaths of many Japanese soldiers. But, you know, and I always thought that's a horrible, horrible way to have to conduct yourself in the conduct of war. But, of course, war is hell. So, you know, I understood. I mean, I'm glad my father did it, because if he didn't do his job right, he probably wouldn't have made it through the war, and I wouldn't be here today. But to bring it full circle, folks, I was just kind of thinking that I'd kind of enjoy heading one of those fire crews if I could be guaranteed that I could take one of those fire crews down to that gathering of AIPAC and spray a little fire among those people and make them feel the flames. Because I can tell you this much, they're going to feel the flames in the end when they all go to hell where they belong. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper here. Stay tuned for more, and then we're going to go to the phone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is the Fire Chief. This is Mike Piper, the Fire Chief. I guess if we do have a revolution, I want to be in charge of the fire squads. Could be interesting. Could be interesting. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we do have at least one phone caller, and I think I might as well just go to that phone call right now and suspend whatever else I have to comment upon, if I really need to comment on anything. we have Jim in Texas. Jim, come on up.
Hello, Mike.
How you doing tonight? You want to join the fire crew?
Yeah, I'll join the fire crew. Just to elaborate a little bit on what's been going on the last couple of days since Scooter Libby was convicted, and we see a gazillion talking heads sitting there saying and implying and saying, why would he bite the bullet for Cheney and horrible Cheney and Bush? Why would he bite the bullet for him? He isn't biting a bullet for anybody. Cheney, he's the one that was running the control operation. Him and his fellow cohorts from the great state or gallant little ally in the Middle East. And the reason he can't say anything is because Cheney has the microphone. They cannot do anything to him without he can come on TV, and they can't edit it. He can come on TV and say, yeah, the whole United States political establishment since 1913 has been completely controlled by the brethren. And how can they stop him? They cannot stop him. That's why he has the high hand. There's nothing they can do to him. And
that's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Nobody that I know of has thought of this. They keep saying, well, why don't they get Cheney? Why don't they get him? They know him and Rove are responsible. Him and Rove aren't responsible. They're puppets. But he knows who is responsible, and they can't quiet him. You think they can bring Cheney on trial, and Cheney can't say, wait a minute, every politician you've ever known in your entire life is a complete slimeball piece of you-know-what, and they've all been controlled by the same group, and I'm prepared to give facts and figures.
Well, I'll tell you, at the very least, Jim, the one other thing that I don't think people ever keep in mind in regard to this whole matter is that, although I tend to think your analysis is pretty much on the mark there, but the thing about what people don't consider is the greater level of corruption involved here, because Scooter Libby has all the reason in the world, if in fact they could actually implicate Dick Cheney in something, Scooter Libby would be the key to it. But, Dick Cheney is incredibly rich. He's got a big pile of money that was handed to him on a silver platter when he was signed on with Halliburton. He went from being a lifelong government bureaucrat to being an overnight multimillionaire worth, I forget what the figures are, upwards of $100 million. In contrast, Mr. Scooter Libby doesn't have anywhere near that much money, but I have a very good idea in my mind that there's a lot of people in a lot of places, namely Dick Cheney, who might be willing to part with $10 or $15 million to keep Scooter Libby silent. And, I'll tell you what, even Scooter Libby, tough butch guy that he is, and I'm joking, he probably would be willing to spend a year in a federal prison if he knew when he got out that he had about $15 or $20 million in a Swiss bank account. So at the very lowest level, putting all politics and ideology aside, there are other factors at work here. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, and these guys are a bunch of sleazy crooks, just like you said.
Why don't we just check Mr. Bill Clinton out, for example? Clinton never had much money to speak of until he signed on as a Shabbos Goy and was willing to do anything. And what happens when he gets out of the presidency? He had maybe $500,000, maybe $1 million in total assets when he was president. He was making $34,000 a year as a governor of Arkansas.
Right.
And this is ridiculous. But as soon as he gets out, all of a sudden he's got all these lucrative speaking engagements. He gets $500,000 for giving a stupid speech that everybody knows is a complete pile of excrement, but he still gets it. And who's giving him this money?
That's right. Exactly. See, this is the whole thing. It all comes back. It all comes back to this massive level of corruption that we have, and we're up against. We have the corruption, that's for sure. We all know that. But in the bigger picture also, Jim, we're also up against the massive media combine that is so controlled lock, stock, and barrel that it has the capacity to control our government.
The The media is controlling everything.
That's exactly
the media
right.
Controls everything. Do you think they thought they could get away with 9/11 with them stupid Larry Silverstein, Mr. David Copperfield of the 21st century? But all of a sudden, 3 buildings he owned all of a sudden disappear, defying all laws of physics, and he's not there with a cape and a top hat and with a waving a cape in front of the buildings, and they disappear, defying all laws of physics, and not one media entity says, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This doesn't make any sense. Not one.
Isn't that interesting?
It's baffling that nobody can sit and think this.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C., here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches. Like I always tell you, folks, it works. And as Headaches Stay Gone says, it's another natural cure they are trying to keep secret from you. Well, it's no secret if you listen to the Republic Broadcasting Network. You know, it's kind of interesting. I was thinking here during the break, since the Israeli kibbutzes are having such trouble these days, people don't want to work, I guess, on the kibbutzes anymore. They all want to get rich. I think we ought to deport all our American politicians over to Israel and make them work on the kibbutzes because they're already slaves of Israel anyway. And then we could get rid of a bad crop here and maybe replace them with something better. What do you think about that, Jim?
I think you're absolutely right, and I'd like to hearken back many, many years ago. You'll probably remember this. After Newt Gingrich, our wonderful conservative fellow, took supposedly control of Congress in 1994, it was within a year or so, I believe, that one of his longtime friends, it was a woman, was in charge of congressional history something or another, and she made a statement that, Nazi Germany wasn't altogether too awful bad, and he fired her the next day. This is a lifelong friend that you say anything. Now, that ought to tell you where these congressmen people's loyalties lie. Here you've got a lifetime friend, and Newt, I understand, his degree was in history, if I'm not mistaken. And here he's a historian who should know a little bit about history, although obviously he doesn't. But anyhow, this is a lifetime friend of his that he got the job of congressional historian or some kind of stupid title like that. And she made the one statement, and the next day she's fired. Now, what kind of person would fire a lifelong friend for making one innocuous statement that, maybe wasn't too awful bad, and that's it? Over and done.
Well, that's Newt Gingrich. He is a politician of, like I say, he's just a very ugly guy all around. I've always been I just really don't like the guy, and the fact that so many of these grassroots conservative activists, so-called, fall all over themselves over Gingrich is very telling. And let me tell you a story about Gingrich, and I remember this so very, very clearly. Back right after Gingrich took charge, as he put it, as after the Republicans took control of Congress and put Gingrich in as House Speaker, Gingrich and the Republicans were just, blowing their own horns and talking about all the big budget cuts they were going to make. Mm-hmm. What's kind of interesting, the Clinton administration said, well, we believe we need to make some budget cuts. We believe in that, but there's one area where we can't cut the budget, and that's aid to Israel. And you know what? Big tax cutting, budget cutting, Newt Gingrich, guess what? He said, almost at the same time, he says, there's so many areas where we can cut and cut cleanly, but one area that cannot be touched is U.S. foreign aid to Israel. Now, imagine this. I mean, the Republicans and the Democrats, they spar over all these issues, but that one issue that they just couldn't disagree upon was aid to Israel. And what's really funny about that? I remember I remember that these remarks were reported. One or the other of the remarks were reported in the same issue of the Washington Post that had a front-page story describing the massive disease, malnutrition, health problems, AIDS, you name it, that are plaguing the American Indian reservations, which are absolutely controlled to the detriment of the American Indians by the U.S. government. So while they were cutting U.S. government funds to the Indian reservations and everything else they could think of, the one thing they couldn't touch, Jim, was foreign aid to Israel.
You cannot name one politician, possibly with the exception of Ron Paul, who has ever advocated anything to do with trimming by as much as 1 shekel the amount of money we give to the Israelis. Not one. I read extensively, and I've never seen one ever make that statement. Ever. Not one politician. This is 535 of these suckers, or 534 if you exclude Ron Paul.
Well, you know, it's funny. Over the years, I will say this much. Over the years, I can't name any specifics off the top of my head, but I do remember on one occasion hearing about someone was saying that foreign policy or foreign aid was one of the areas that we needed to take a serious look at, in cutting it. But he added the caveat. He said there are some aspects of U.S. foreign aid that are absolutely vital to America's national interest, and of course, that was aid to Israel.
Absolutely.
I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny, but the power and the clout of the Israeli lobby, which of course, I talk about all the time because I believe it's so central to the condition that America is in today, both at home and in the world. It has almost become a caricature of itself because the Israelis and their adherents in this country, and not all of them are Jewish by any means, are drunk with power and emboldened by their own overwhelming sense of entitlement that it's almost like something you would see in a very bad film,
It's the only chance we have is that, as somebody wrote about this probably 200 years ago, that the only way we can win is they always overreach, always.
Mm-hmm.
They always overreach, and people, they need to understand that statement. They always say, it's like the old saying that this Jewish woman at the beach, her son is there, and he's swept into the sea, and she calls on God to please save my son, please save my son, and God saves his son, and he brings him back to shore, and they're there. I done exactly what you said. I saved your son. And she said, well, he had a hat. I don't know if you ever heard that one before. But
no,
you saved him, but where's his hat? They always overreach. And that to me, I remember this for years and years because it explains the whole philosophy of our brethren, so to speak.
Yeah. See, this is this is precisely the problem. If it weren't such a serious matter, for the survival of this country, we could tolerate that. But when you have one specific group that is so overwhelmingly in charge of the nation's affairs at a time when our nation is really in a precarious position internationally, that's not healthy. That wouldn't be healthy for any country in the world. And I tell you, it's going to backfire. And that's why it's so vital that we continue to talk about it as we do, because they need to hear this. They need to hear it time and time again, and maybe someday they're going to wake up and say, maybe we don't want to get ourselves in trouble. Maybe we're just going to back off for once.
But, Mike, I'm a born pessimist because I can see Congress initiating something with like 490 co-sponsors saying, where's his hat? Because that's exactly what Congress does. You saved him, but where's his hat? This is what they do.
Jim, That's a great line.
Well,
Listen, I have to move on here. I always appreciate your call, so Jim, thank you very much.
Okay.
Folks, Congress is going to pass a resolution asking, where's his hat? You know, Jim's made a good point there, folks. It's, you know, it really has reached the point of comedy. I hate to laugh about it. I know there are probably some of you out there saying this is a serious matter. Piper shouldn't be laughing about it. Well, folks, I'll tell you what, if we don't keep our sense of humor, we're going to go crazy. All right, let's go to David in Massachusetts. David, are you there?
I know that your conversation, when things are not going right, sometimes you got to have see a little laugh in the dark cloud, or otherwise you just would become so downhearted it would affect you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Concerning this issue of Israel and the Jewish people and whatever, I want to recount to you a story that I told on this program again, and I want to tell it again.
Well, tell it again, because sometimes you have to tell something 100 times before it sinks in. So go ahead, tell it again.
I heard years ago, this is over 20 years ago, I heard Rabbi Meir Kahane speak. And Rabbi Meir Kahane said that he didn't want the press to bring in any tape recorders because he was going to say things he didn't want recorded. And he went on to talk about Israel. And Kahane said that there were big differences between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, what they say in English, Sephardic Jewish and Ashkenazic. And he said that he wasn't afraid of the Arabs. He was afraid that Israel could have a very disruptive connection between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, that they could wreck the country with their disagreements with each other. And then he went on to talk about the fact that most of the Jewish prostitutes were Sephardic women, and they worked for Palestinian Arabs who were their pimps. And then he went on to say that Israel, he gave a little history of Israel, about that northern Israel was called Judah and southern Israel was called Israel. And he didn't like the fact that the Jewish people over in Israel who are born there and have lived there for many years don't call themselves Jews anymore, that they use a word, it wasn't a Saba or a Shaba?
Sabra.
Yes, a Sabra. And they weren't calling themselves Jews. He didn't like that. And then he went on to talk about the fact that the Jewish people, here's one of the most important points I want to bring out, that he said that the Jewish people have nothing to fear from the Arabs. And he said, I consider the Arabs a contemptible people, but I don't hate them. But he said, hatred, I hate the Irish and the Italians. He said he hated those people in America. He hated them from the very bottom of his mind, and he felt that they had interfered with Jewish political progress in this country, and if it weren't for Irish and Italians, the Jewish political network could have accomplished much more in this country without the presence of Irish and Italians.
Well, for God's sake, maybe we need to exterminate the Irish and the Italians, since the Jews are God's chosen people, and whatever they want, I'm told, is what we must give them.
And then later, as you know, a few years after the speech was over, he did get shot by that Mossad, and it was a Jewish-American lawyer, William Kunstler, I believe, who defended Mossad, and in the first trial, Mossad was found not guilty, and then he was tried again, I think, on a second trial, and I'm not sure if it had to do with a federal charge as compared to a state charge, and he was convicted the second time, I think. Do you remember that?
Yes, I recall generally the circumstances. I don't recall, though. I didn't know that there were two trials like that. You may be right on that, though, Dave. I don't remember specifically.
Yes, I think there were two trials, and in the second trial, I don't know if Kunstler was a lawyer or not, but the second trial, Mossad was convicted, and I think he's still in jail.
Yes, he is still in jail. You know, I tell you, at the time and afterwards, it's very interesting. A lot of Kahane's followers were absolutely convinced that the Kahane himself may have been, although it was an Arab who pulled the trigger, that Kahani's murder was actually orchestrated by elements within Israel itself. And that's entirely possible. I don't have any inside information on that, but I know there was a lot of speculation along those lines. To digress for a moment, one of Kahani's followers, Irv Rubin, who took over one faction of the Jewish Defense League after Kahani's death, Irv Rubin and his top lieutenant, Mr. Krugel, both died under mysterious circumstances, shall we say, in federal prison. I personally, what's interesting is, Rubin's own followers say that he was probably murdered by elements within the U.S. government. I actually tend to agree with them on that, because it's my guess that Irv Rubin, through his contacts in the Jewish Defense League and thus back to the Mossad, may have been somehow in tune to some of the intrigues of the so-called 911 hijackers, because some of those 911 hijackers, those young Arab men who were supposedly manning the planes on September 11th, were in place in Southern California. And we do know, of course, that the Mossad was monitoring those Arab hijackers, at least prior to 911. And I've always suspected, again, without having any, it's just one of these gut feelings, I've always suspected that maybe Irv Rubin and his partner, Mr. Krugel, may have had some knowledge of that, and that's the real reason why Mr. Rubin is no longer with us, that he was considered quite expendable. And, as many in the hardline Zionist elements of Israel have pointed out time and again, they have no problem with killing off up to as much as, I think, 1/3 of the Jewish people, if that means the survival of Israel. So there is a philosophical standpoint within that hardline Zionist element that even Jews are expendable, even the lives of Jews are expendable if it means the survival of Israel as a political entity.
Extending your remarks concerning that book called Eichmann in Jerusalem, written by Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt made remarks in her book about Israel, the laws that set up Israel in 1949. They were called the Basic Laws, and that they were similar to the Code of Nuremberg of Hitler's government in 1935. And I remember reading that in that book written by Hannah Arendt, and she was criticized to the point of practically threatening her by elements of Jews in Israel. They were so angry at her.
In fact, Dave, I would amend what you said to take it so far as to say that my understanding is that she was absolutely correct, and that in fact at that time the state of Israel used the very Nuremberg laws that were in force in Germany to define who was a Jew under German law. They were the same laws that were carried over into what we might want to call the Fourth Reich, the establishment of the state of Israel. So yeah, you're absolutely right, but even more right, I think, than you think.
Yeah, and Hannah Arendt, of course, she's dead now, and she did put in her book that the Mossad is not as this, some people think that they're so capable, that they're like the super-duper people of all humanity to go ferret people out. But she brought out that Eichmann had done so much talking down in Buenos Aires about his...
Hey, Dave, we're going to the break. Hold that till we come back. This is Michael Collins Piper here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. It's hard to believe, but this hour is almost up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington. Dave, unless you had another comment, I want to try to squeeze in one more caller here. So, Dave, what do you have to say?
Okay, the last thing I want to say is that Eichmann had done so much talking in Argentina about his background and the authority that he had that it's no wonder that the Mossad didn't catch him. And I had read in one book on him that as recently as 3 days before he was apprehended by the Israeli Secret Service, he had done all kinds of talking in front of this woman, and she had turned him in. And 3 days later, he was nabbed.
Well, there's so much for the Mossad. All right, Dave, thanks for your call.
Thank you.
All right, we got Jack in Arizona. Jack, we can squeeze you in for a couple minutes here. Fire away. I guess we don't have... Okay, all right, we've got Byron in Canada. Byron, we can squeeze you in for about a minute here.
Okay. Hey, the two guys that was in jail in California, they were in there because they tried to assassinate Daryl...
Daryl Issa, yeah, that was the official charge against him, that they were going to try to bomb his office. Exactly.
Hey, but anyway, what I phoned you about, and I phoned the newspaper there, America Free Press, on this. I seen the statistics once in the U.S. World and Globe years ago, and I wish I'd have kept the article. But yeah, I gave the population of the Jewish people in 1938 and 1948. And anyhow, the Jewish population in Europe in 1938 was 8,039,608. In 1948, it was 9,372,668, and the overall population in 38 was 15,748,091, and in 1948, it was 15,753,638. Now, this was compiled by the American Jewish Committee and the Jewish Statistic Bureau of the Synagogue Council of America. Now, and it's by H.S. Linnide. It's not real clear. If these are legitimate organizations that kept stats of the population of the Jews, where did the 6 million? Where are they? I mean.
It sounds like the Jewish population grew by about 6 million rather than was cut down by about 6 million.
No, but the overall figure in 38 overall, there was just a little bit of an increase in 1948 over 1938.
Well, one other thing you have to consider too, which makes the figure all the more interesting, is the fact that a lot of the people who would have died during that time frame would have been replaced by a lot of other people, but not to such an extent that it would make up the difference of the 6 million. So,
60 years later, the population is only, I think, around 16. So, it hasn't grown a lot in the last 16 years from what it was in 1948.
Well, it's interesting. Two different people within 6 months of each other both told me, and these are people that were not readers of Holocaust literature, they told me that the so-called Holocaust denial literature, both of them told me that from their own calculations in reading standard histories of World War II, they never believed that 6 million figure simply because it just didn't work.
Yeah.
So there again, that's what I always call that some of these funny little details, Byron, that when you put it all together, give you a completely different perspective on history, but in this case, a far more accurate perspective as to what did and didn't happen.
Just be real quick. I know you're running out of time. Jim, the first caller. Hey, you guys got photographic memories. How can you recall names? Like I heard you on that other show the other morning.
I just have too many books and papers to refer to.
Holy crap! I can't even remember my grandkids' names half the time. But,
all right, well, we got to go, Byron. Thanks for your call. Sorry we couldn't keep you on longer. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper here. Signing off for the evening. See you tomorrow night. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington, D.C., here on this Thursday, March 8th. I'm coming to you here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, of course, courtesy of Headaches Stay Gone, the all-natural cure for headaches, and it does work. Later in the hour, I'm going to be giving you the 800 number for Headaches Stay Gone. You can write that down right now, 1-800. But if you don't have your pen and paper to write that number down, go get your pen and paper because I'm going to give you that number. Well, I have a very, very interesting and disturbing, frightening announcement to make regarding our investigation of former American Free Press correspondent Christopher Bollyn, who is now officially signed on as a as the royal consort of Queen Esther Huffschmidt and Beryl Bradford Smith. The information is very disturbing, ladies and gentlemen. It's as I say, it's very frightening, and we're going to come to that, after the break. But needless to say, well, I'm repeating myself. It's very, very disturbing information, folks. So we will come back to that in a few minutes after the break. In the meantime, wanted to share with you some interesting notes from letters to the editor of the New York Times, Dan Shea of Seattle, Washington, whose brother, Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Shea, was killed in Iraq in September of 2004, writes about the felony conviction of I. Louis Libby, the powerful Zionist who was chief of staff for Vice President Dick Cheney, and in my opinion, the real head of the Zionist octopus in the White House. Mr. Shea writes, on the same day that Mr. Libby's guilty verdict was splashed across the headlines, it was reported that 9 more soldiers had been killed in bombings in Iraq. Like it or not, our soldiers and Marines are the true fall guys of this administration, not Mr. Libby. Very, very interesting. And, there's all these fools out there who say you shouldn't speak out against the war when our men and women are over there fighting. Well, here's someone who can speak out against the war and the insanity of this administration, this Mr. Shea, whose brother's life was taken, murdered by Louis Libby and George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Another letter to the editor, folks. Howard Popper, writing from Phoenix, Arizona, says, the Libby verdict reminds us that after much painstaking effort, one may be convicted of lying to the FBI, but not yet of lying to the American people. Well, George Bush will eventually pay a mighty price for his lies to the American people. Likewise will Dick Cheney. If they don't pay their price here on earth, as I say, they're going to go to hell. There's no question about that. We have that much satisfaction. They are going to burn forever, just as they deserve. All right. Well, I have to say I'm very, very proud to have opened up the Washington Times today. It is a Zionist newspaper, but very pro-Zionist newspaper, but occasionally they will take advertisements that don't go along with their editorial point of view, and there was a full-page advertisement in there this week with the story, with the headline saying, our alliance with Israel will be America's demise. Well, I couldn't agree with that sentiment more. But when we come back after the break, I'm going to read you the whole advertisement because I have a special interest in it, and I think you'll find it interesting. All right, and get your pen and paper handy, folks, because I'm going to give you that 800 number for Headaches Stay Gone. Because you may have a problem with headaches, and Headaches Stay Gone will solve that problem for you. So get your pen and paper handy, folks. This is Michael Collins Piper. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., which, of course, is the headquarters of American Free Press. I was down there today. They were putting the paper together, but I was so distracted by this information that's come up regarding the shadowy world of Christopher Bollyn that I didn't get a chance to really take a look at what's going in the paper this week. But without being psychic, I can tell you that it's going to be a lot of good information. So when I get a copy of the paper tomorrow, maybe I'll give you some heads up on what you're going to get in this week's issue. Well, in any case, there was a full-page advertisement placed in the Washington Times today, and it is of special interest to me. I was really thrilled to see this advertisement. It reads as follows. Our alliance with Israel will be America's demise. Iraq and Iran are no threat to America, but have always been a threat to Zionist Israel. America has gone to war shedding American blood to defend Israel, an official anti-Christianity nation. For example, Reverend Billy Graham and his evangelical crusades have always been prohibited in Israel, yet we continue to give billions to Israel, which lacks religious freedom. It is now time to rethink our massive aid to today's Zionist Israel. Any nation that violates the principles of our Constitution does not qualify for our tax dollars. The bottom line issue in the Middle East is the Palestinian conflict. Ask yourself this simple question: who stole property from whom? The answer to that is the solution to the Middle East quagmire. There will be no peace until the Palestinian issue is resolved. Iran's president has said that Israel should be, quote-unquote, wiped off the map. But Israel's goal since 1948 has been to wipe Palestine off the map. Because of Zionist bulldozers, over 400 Palestinian villages have been wiped off the map. Today's Zionist Israel is not the true Israel, but the false Israel, having no biblical claim to the land. For biblical proof, request the pamphlet, The False Israel, Return to the Land. Faith, not law. That's the name of the pamphlet, folks. Solution to our quagmire: follow George Washington's advice, avoid foreign entanglements. We must dissolve our unholy alliance with Antichrist Zionist Israel. The culture and the religion of Israeli Talmudism are not compatible with the Christian Western culture. The American culture is a Christian culture. To attempt to blend the two, Christian and Middle Eastern, is an exercise in futility. Amen. The Gordian knot of Iraq is a classic example of what happens when America follows the lead of the neocons, the Zionists within, in their attempt to defend Zionist Israel. A must-read, The High Priests of War by Michael Collins Piper, is the secret history of how America's Zionists came to power and orchestrated the war against Iraq, using American blood to do so. Well, this ad, folks, was placed by my old friend Stan Rittenhouse, who worked for many years for Liberty Lobby, and he's been a guest on this program, as a matter of fact. He's a good man. He's a genuine Bible-believing Christian, and because he is a Bible-believing Christian, he knows that Israel, as he said, is not the true Israel. The state of Israel is not the true Israel, but a false Israel. Well, if you want to get a copy of Stan's pamphlet, The False Israel, I'll give you an address, because I know you got your pen and paper handy. I'm going to give you the address to write Stan. It's The Exhorters. That's Exhorters. The Exhorters, Box 492, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. I'll read that again. The Exhorters, Box 492, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Stan paid a lot of money to place this advertisement in the Washington Times. He's a gutsy guy, no nonsense. Been doing a lot of good for a long, long time, and I was really flattered that he said these things about my book in that advertisement. So that was a real delight. Very, very seldom do I ever see anything nice said about me in the pages of any establishment newspaper, on the rare occasions that they do mention me. So of course, this was a paid advertisement, but amazing they took it. But over the years, the Washington Times has, in fact, taken such advertisements, and I'm really proud that it was my friend Stan Rittenhouse who put that in there. Okay, well, folks, as you know, I mentioned some time ago on this program that American Free Press took advantage of its friendly relationship with a real old-line American conservative patriot who happens to be one of the top private investigators in the country. You know, it's funny. You find a lot of patriots in a lot of unusual places. You know, they don't. They are not always outspoken about their views because sometimes it can be harmful to their way of life. But there are good patriots in a lot of different places around the country, and we dispatched this patriot to do a little bit of investigating regarding the activities of Christopher Bollyn in light of Bollyn's strange about-face vis-a-vis his association with American Free Press. And that's a whole story in and of itself. You've heard bits and pieces of it fall out over this program over the past year. But we had suspected for a long time that there were other things at work. Well, the investigator did, in fact, launch a preliminary investigation, and as I told you on the air, his indications were that Bollyn was receiving money from overseas, as he put it. Now, this is, of course, all very interesting because of the fact that Bollyn was crying poor mouth, and in fact, evidently, he did have some other sources of income. They have not yet been traced. The investigator also discovered that Bollyn apparently has been visited regularly by an individual or individuals bearing license plates that cannot be traced. Now, if you know anything, if you've seen police dramas, you know that a license plate that can't be traced is almost semi-official in nature. In other words, someone is using a license and they're getting away with it, and the police are letting them get away with it, the police and the authorities, because it's official. So obviously, folks, the indications are that Mr. Bollyn is indeed in touch with undoubtedly high-level intelligence people. I have commented before on this program that I had even suspected from the very beginning when I met him for the first time in Chicago, prior to the strange circumstances actually in which he was drafted to work for the old Spotlight newspaper and then later American Free Press. I suspected at the time, for a variety of reasons, which I'm going to outline in a future program, precisely why I believe that Bollyn is an intelligence operative, although I thought he was on our side. Now that's somewhat to be questioned. But in any case, all of that having been said, we received a preliminary memo from our investigator. He has been unable to make it to Washington formally because we had bad weather the one week and everything was just was impossible, and then some other things have come up. But he did provide us a preliminary memo, which indeed, as you'll see, is actually pretty frightening to read. I can't read you everything because it's confidential in nature, but some points are worth listening to. He says regarding Bollyn, this case contains many unexplained questions. Each question may be answered provided someone is willing to endure the risks that I believe are ever present. In other words, this skilled investigator, and I want to tell you something, this guy has taken on, let's just put it this way, some of the most powerful people in the country. This investigator is scared. He says it's risky to investigate Christopher Bollyn. He says, as your investigator, I do not recommend you proceed further. I have discovered the distinct possibility of involvement by intelligence people of a higher order. Briefly stated, there are certain risks to be considered before proceeding. Twice use of the word risks. We have developed that the target is spending more money than he is capable of earning. The target, of course, being Mr. Bollyn, the target of the investigation. He is spending more money than he is capable of earning. Whoever treads these waters should tread carefully. Before you go any further, I suggest you know exactly what risks you are willing to take. In other words, American Free Press has been advised by one of the top private investigators in the country that to investigate our own former employee, Christopher Bollyn, is a risk. In other words, Bollyn is being protected at the highest levels. The fact that he was arrested means nothing because, as we all know from looking at the history of both the FBI and the CIA and the National Security Agency, back during the Vietnam War, the FBI was investigating anti-war groups that were being funded by the CIA. And on the other hand, there were elements in the CIA that were also investigating anti-war groups that were also being funded by the CIA. The right hand often doesn't know what the left hand is doing. When we come back, we'll discuss this Bollyn affair a little bit further. It's scary, folks, and very little scares me, but this does. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here. You have your pen and paper handy. I'm going to give you the number for Headaches Stay Gone and their address. The number is 800-327-0727, 1-800-327-0727. And if you, for whatever reason, want to drop them a note rather than call that 800 number, their address is 199 Springton Road, just like it sounds, Glenmore, PA 19343. That's Glenmore, Glenmoore, Pennsylvania, 19343. Write them or call them and ask them for not a sampler, folks. You got to pay for it if you're happy with it, but they'll send you 60 capsules in a bottle. Try it out. If it works, you pay the bill. Pretty simple offer. If you don't like it, send it back. You don't have to pay them anything. All right, folks. This matter of Christopher Bollyn and his wife, Helya Brand Caskell. Very strange here, folks. Our private investigator who looked into Mr. Bollyn, as I've pointed out, has said there's a distinct possibility of involvement by intelligence people of a higher order, and he used the word risk, or risks, 1, 2, 3 times in his preliminary report here. He said that whoever treads these waters should tread carefully. Well, as I said, folks, the fact that Bollyn was arrested by the police and even the circumstances of that arrest are somewhat murky. Whatever he was doing had even in his original reports on it, Bollyn himself admitted that his own little daughter, 8 years old, said, "Daddy, stop it, they're going to arrest you." So obviously Bollyn was doing something to provoke the police, such that even his daughter made that observation. He's now spinning it, of course. He said Homeland Security was behind it. He even implied that I was involved in setting him up for an arrest. In another program, he actually implied that Chris Petherick, the editor of American Free Press, was somehow involved because Petherick dared to ask Bollyn where he was, and Bollyn said that anyone who asks where he is, he's suspicious of. Well, that sounds like plain old paranoia to me, folks, but this is someone who obviously is immersed in some high-level activity, and as I say, I believe has been for a long, long time. But we have been told that to pursue Bollyn further is a risk. Isn't that interesting, folks? I think it's damned interesting myself. And, you know, from a very, very reliable source, we've been advised that Mr. Bollyn seems to be a tax scofflaw. Mr. Bollyn has apparently neither filed nor paid federal income taxes for several years. Isn't that interesting, folks? Someone who talks about all the time describing himself as a target of the power elite, and yet in a matter such as this, where he'd be an open target, not paying taxes, not filing federal income tax returns, if our source is correct on this. Isn't it interesting that Mr. Bollyn is allowed to continue to operate as he has been operating? Isn't it interesting, folks? Who is protecting Christopher Bollyn and why? Folks, this is the kind of strange things that you come up against in this political world. You know, I've been around it now for quite a while, more than half my life, and this is always the amazing thing about it. Things are not always as they seem, and that was one of the points I made in my book, The Judas Goats, that over the years there were people who were saying the right things and doing the right things and appearing to be patriots, but in fact they had other agendas at work, whether working for some faction of the CIA or the FBI or outright treasonous groups such as the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith or the American Jewish Congress or the Southern Poverty Law Center. sometimes there's people who are intelligence agents who use the mask of being a journalist to conduct their operation. When we come back, we'll talk more about that. Stay tuned. You might take advantage of this opportunity to call Headache Stay Gone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Just talking with my producer off the air, as I say, things aren't always as they seem to be, and, my personal feeling about this matter regarding Bollyn is that he, in fact, has been an intelligence operative probably for a very, very, very long time, probably going back to the time that he was working on a kibbutz in Israel. There's some question, actually, about his wife's activities as well. There's some of my associates who believe that she may even be the real big bad mama of the situation, to use some biker terminology there, that she herself. And it's kind of interesting, Bollyn is always, he was attacking Victor Thorne, who's apparently Victor Thorne is the pen name of Scott Makufka. And by the way, Mr. Makufka is not Jewish, and it really wouldn't matter to me whether he was or not. He's a good man. But it's kind of funny. Bollyn spent a great deal of time bashing Makufka. He even sent out an email suggesting that Makufka and I were homosexual lovers, but come as a surprise to Lisa Giuliani, of course. But in any case, he made a great deal out of the suspicion that Mr. Makufka, Mr. Thorne, might be Jewish. Well, it's funny. His wife's names, Brand and Caskell, Helia Brand, Caskell, Bollyn. Brand and Caskell are both Jewish names. Caskell comes, it's a derivative of the biblical name Ezekiel, and Brand is the name of one of the top Zionists. So there's a good likelihood that Bollyn's, not only was his first wife an Israeli, and apparently an Israeli intelligence operative, according to Bollyn's own stories are to be believed, but it appears as though his second wife, if this is indeed his second wife, Helia Brand Caskell, the big bad mama of the DeGuello gang, it appears that she, in fact, may be of Jewish origin herself. Whether that means anything, I don't know, but I'm just mentioning it for the record. These intelligence operations are always very interesting, and I've mentioned a couple times publicly, and I mention it. It's mentioned in my biography in the back of Final Judgment many years ago. I had a friend long since deceased who was he was a mercenary. He had been involved in a lot of intelligence operations, working for various parties over the years, and sponsors of the operation were, but I said to my friend, he said to me, he says, look, he says, I tell you what, he says, I'm making this offer once. He says, if you say yes, I will make all the arrangements necessary, and we'll get you right to work. In fact, I would have even learned a foreign language. It would have trained me in a foreign language. Who they were, I don't know, and I never asked, and he never said, excuse me. But in any case, I said to him, we were sitting in a bar, a little rough bar out in Virginia somewhere, kind of place where they shoot people. In fact, there had been a shooting in the bar a week before. In any case, I said to him, all right, I said, let me ask you this. I said, or he said to me, I should say, excuse me, I'm rambling here, folks. He said to me, he says, I'll make you this offer once. He says, you say yes, we'll take care of it. If you say no, never bring it up to me again. I will never make the offer again. I said to my friend, I said, let me ask you this. What is your advice? What should I say? And he said, say no. And I said, no. Well, to bring things full circle, folks, I tend to believe that when they made the offer to Mr. Bollyn, he said yes. I personally think he's been not really reporting on the 911 affair, but he's reporting on the 911 truth movement to his handlers. What better way to make a reputation and to get involved and immersed in 911 truth than by posing as a journalist, by actually being a journalist, by signing on with a newspaper like American Free Press and using it as your entree into truth-seeking circles, visiting the homes of 911 widows and survivors, interviewing, that is, debriefing these people and so many other people who are out there looking for the truth. And then at the same time, bringing out some real good information. And a lot of the information was not unique. Bollyn reported on what others had described, nothing that he particularly dug out on his own, but he was doing a lot of traveling and was in an ideal position to be monitoring the 911 truth movement. That is what I'm now increasingly coming to believe has been the real story. Now, of course, I'm only speculating there, but I think I'm safe in saying that it's informed speculation. Well, there's much more to be told on this, but I want it to be told in a very structured fashion. I have gone on here at some length, but as I say, I think it's an important matter because it involves a very important issue, and that's 911 truth. Well, I can say this much. It appears that a lot of what Christopher Bollyn has purported to be 911 truth has been, in fact, frankly, a lot of 911 disinformation. In any case, I'm going to go to the phones now. We have Jeff in Vermont. Jeff, sorry to make you wait so long.
No problem.
Yeah, how you doing tonight, Jeff?
Good. How you doing?
All righty.
A little bit warmer down there?
A little bit.
Okay.
Not much. The snow went away, but it's still cold.
You hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, there's like a thing. I'm not. I don't really follow. I don't really like to get into the drama between you guys. I mean, I just wish you guys could get along, but I guess that's never going to happen. My opinion about it. I mean, Christopher Bollyn. I mean, I there's no smoking gun on either issue with Hushman and their attacks on you and your attacks on them. It's in my mind, it's actually menial to the big picture of things, and I think it's a distraction on both parts.
Well, I agree with that.
And there's no smoking gun. There's no empirical evidence to prove that your case or their case. I get the well report. I mean, it's just to go on. I think it's a waste of time.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jeff, I agree with you up to a point, and for a long time we said nothing about the matter, but it's still there just little things keep popping up that require that it be commented upon. And I'll tell you what I mentioned this off the air to my producer Marcus here. One of our great concerns in American Free Press is that for so long we were publishing stories by Christopher Bollyn and trusting him. Now, however, we're finding out that some of those stories were not true, whether they were deliberate frauds or inadvertent frauds or outright hoaxes, so to speak. We don't know, and that requires that we have to be honest about it and say, hey, look, we trusted this guy, but he may have given you false information, and that's the real concern. I can tell you this much, that at one point, years ago, there's a satire magazine called The Onion. Bollyn submitted a story to American Free Press that was a rewrite of a satirical article in The Onion. He was presenting it to us as a legitimate news story. Fortunately, Chris Peserick, the editor of the paper, started doing a little bit of research on his own and discovered that this story was just a satire. So, you see, that story almost made it into American Free Press because we trusted Christopher Bollyn. So, you see, this is the problem here. It's a real bad problem. And, my show here was abused by Bollyn and Huffschmidt with this guy Sam Danner.
Yeah,
a lot of people raise serious questions about that. And I understand what you're saying though, Jeff. Don't get me wrong. You know what I mean? But as I say, this report from this investigator is very disturbing because it indicates that there is some, as I say, some higher power involved there. And over the years, this is what I was talking about earlier. Over the years, American Free Press and of course prior to that, the Spotlight were subjected to lawsuits by E. Howard Hunt, William F. Buckley Jr., Bill Mermelstein. Then, of course, the lawsuit that finally destroyed the Spotlight. These were all orchestrated by people with connections to the CIA. And not just connections; they were CIA people, and it appears we're trying to piece this whole thing together. It appears that Bollyn, in fact, may have been part of a covert operation to disrupt American Free Press several years ago, designed in part to get me out of American Free Press altogether.
Well, I think you guys should be apprehensive about what happened to the Spotlight and everything.
Yeah. See, this is what it all comes down to, and also in this matter of the 911 truth movement. There's so many people out there who are well-meaning, who are investigating, and a lot of those people, although they're well-meaning, they're really not qualified to be investigating and making assumptions and assertions. And then there are some people who are out there who are just deliberately stirring the pot for whoever their sponsors may be to try to muddy the waters. And this is what it all comes down to, And like I say, I wanted to bring this up tonight because I had mentioned it on the show before, and some weeks from now I'm going to kind of put a whole comprehensive show together that just covers the whole thing, and as far as I'll be concerned, that should be the last of it because these are things that have to be said. Unfortunately.
Well, I can tell you because I follow the 9/11 Truth Movement very closely, and there's a big thing in the 9/11 Truth Movement about anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. There's a guy named Eric Williams that was supposed to speak at the Arizona conference in Chandler, and he just released a book on Holocaust denial, and there was a big uproar in the whole 9/11 Truth Movement about, we can't have this guy. He's going to taint the whole Truth Movement, and they made a decision that he wasn't going to speak there because of his views on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. It's kind of weird because they don't like people that have that think the Jews did it. It's kind of weird if you look at it. It seems almost that the people that are going to expose it did it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of a touchy subject with all this, and a lot of people know Christopher Bollyn's views on Jews, so they're really apprehensive about anybody in that nature exposing anything because they're so worried about being labeled, and it's very prevalent in.
I think I lost you there for a second, Jeff. What did you just say? What was the last thing you said?
There's a lot of apprehensive in that where they don't want to be labeled as anti-Semitic movement or a Holocaust denial movement. They don't even want to talk about the moon landing. They just want to keep it as 9/11 with not blaming any certain country or any certain factor.
Well, it's kind of like saying, well, the Illuminati is behind all our problems, and not mentioning the fact that it wasn't the Illuminati that was funding the politicians in Washington. It's kind of like you know what I'm saying. It's if I, as I always tell people, if I had to do it over again, I'd be an accountant.
But it's the conditioning of people that's I guess that's the point. When 9/11 goes more and more mainstream, they're scared of being labeled and being judged by the media or by any other group of people. So that's what they're scared of.
Yeah, I tell you, this throwing around of and even people who suggest that Israel may have had a hand in 9/11 or even had foreknowledge of it, that is considered or it's cast in the media as a quote unquote anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And there's nothing however you define, people always say, well, the Arabs are Semites too, however you want to define it. To say that Israel was involved in something is not, by its very nature, anti-Semitic. I always make the point that, if you do a search on the Internet of Israel, the phrase Israel denied, Israel is always denying something, whereas if you search Indonesia denied or Ireland denied or Iceland denied, you'll find stories that say, like, Iceland denied Germany victory in the international soccer match. So it's like in the case of Israel where there's smoke, there's fire, and the likelihood of certainly of Israeli foreknowledge of 9/11 is so strong that it's even reached now kind of a not exactly mainstream, but Alexander Coburn has written about it. He's had a piece about it in his magazine Counterpunch, and his co-editor is named Silverstein, and that sounds pretty Jewish to me, and I don't think...
Larry?
Yeah. No, you're thinking of...
Silverstein,
yeah. Yeah, you're thinking, no, this is somebody else.
I know.
Yeah, but...
I just make the connection.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. But, well, my God, we are at the break here already. Listen, if you want to hang on for the break, please do. This is Michael Collins Piper getting ready to wrap up this hour. I've been babbling here, folks. I hope you haven't gone to sleep. Maybe I gave you a headache. If you did, you know where to go. HeadacheStayGone.com. Get some Headache Stay Gone. It works, folks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington, the headquarters of American Free Press, which is not a Zionist publication. It's an anti-Zionist publication. Okay, well, we have Jeff on from Vermont. We just kind of wandered around here. I'll just repeat again. Are you still there, Jeff?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, like I say, I understand the point you're making, but I hope you also understand, where I'm coming from, because, I think I will have to say this. I think what you're saying represents the thinking of a lot of people out there. But on the other hand, we at American Free Press, there is this certain responsibility that we have to set the record straight, particularly in light of the fact that some of these stories that Bollyn apparently foisted off on us are just not true.
And then demise of the spotlight probably puts it into perspective too, because you don't want something like that to happen again.
Yeah, exactly. It's I tell you, it's. I can tell you that the demise of the spotlight was very traumatic, for me personally, and certainly for everybody who worked there. As a consequence of those problems, I basically lost my life savings. Not very much money, but a lot of money that sure would be nice to have today. It's kind of hard to explain how it happened and why it happened, but needless to say, it affected me personally that way. And it was also very traumatic for the populist or the patriot movement in general, because, the Spotlight had, at the time of its demise, had like 70,000 subscribers. These were good people who put a lot of faith in that newspaper, and when it went down, it was very discouraging to a lot of people who just kind of threw up their hands and said, if the biggest, oldest, loudest newspaper of this type can't make it, where are we going to go from here, And, it's, thank God, though, for the Internet and for so many other independent publications that are out there that, in one form or another, carry the torch,
But the thing is, everybody's not a Zionist agent, and some people have that kind of mentality, and that's I don't like that. Everybody's not a Zionist agent, and I don't like defending, but Eric Huffman's book Painful Questions is an excellent read. I think the guy is very smart, and Dale Brad says he's got some great interviews on his website, and and he has a lot of good information out there, and it's just that I wish all this crap wasn't happening with.
Well, I tell you, talking about everybody being a Zionist agent, Ernst Zundel's attorney, very good man, and Ernst Zundel's wife, Ingrid Rimland Zundel, were visiting the American Free Press office the other day. They happened to be here in Washington, trying to get some help for some legal matters involving Ernst Zundel's case. This is a man. Ernst Zundel's I don't know how old he is. He's 70-some years old. He's in jail in Germany. Can never return to the United States. His wife is here. She's not a young woman. And Eric Hupschmidt says that Ernst Zundel and Ingrid Zundel are Zionist agents. You
have to have proof. You have to have evidence to support anything you say. It's just.
Well, Jeff, listen, I appreciate your call, and you're a very sensible person, and I appreciate your opinions on things. And like I say, this is no easy task for me to have to talk about these things, but it's unfortunately part of the game here, part of the unfortunate requirement, and that's unfortunately the way it is. So, in any case, tomorrow night I hope we'll have something far more productive to talk about, and I'm sure we will. So. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to the callers who didn't make it up. We'll try to get you up tomorrow night. This is Michael Collins Piper signing off and telling you better check out Headaches Stay Gone because it works.